Najee Davenport. Najee Davenport had a solid NFL career as a running back, winning a Super Bowl with the Pittsburgh Steelers and carving out a role as a physical, downhill runner. But despite his on-field success, Davenport is far more infamous for one of the strangest scandals in football history. While still in college at the University of Miami, Davenport was arrested for an incident so bizarre, it still defies belief. According to police reports, he broke into a dorm room at Barry University and defecated in a woman's laundry hamper. She awoke to find him squatting in her closet. That's the story that would forever follow him. The incident became a running joke in sports media and late-night comedy for years. What's tragic is that Davenport had the talent to be remembered as a dependable backfield contributor. Instead, he became the punchline of one of the weirdest NFL stories ever, overshadowing everything he did on the field. Sam Hurd. Sam Hurd was supposed to be one of those under-the-radar success stories. An undrafted wide receiver out of Northern Illinois, Hurd worked his way up the Dallas Cowboys depth chart and became a reliable special teams player and occasional pass catcher. In 2011, he signed a $5 million contract with the Chicago Bears. But while his NFL career was taking off, his real ambitions were taking place off the field. And what was uncovered shocked the league. Shortly after signing with the Bears, Hurd was arrested outside a steakhouse in Chicago by undercover federal agents. The charge? Attempting to purchase and distribute massive quantities of cocaine and marijuana. Authorities claimed Hurd was trying to establish a full-fledged drug empire. According to court documents, Hurd told agents he wanted to buy 5 to 10 kilograms of cocaine and 1,000 pounds of marijuana per week to distribute across the Chicago area. He even claimed he had other NFL players as potential buyers. This wasn't a side hustle. This was a blueprint for a criminal operation on a massive scale. Once arrested, Hurd cooperated minimally, but never implicated any teammates. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to drug trafficking conspiracy. Josh Brent. Josh Brent was a massive defensive tackle drafted by the Dallas Cowboys in 2010. He wasn't a household name, but he carved out a spot on the Cowboys roster with raw strength and surprising quickness for his size. Off the field, he was known as a loyal friend and a laid-back teammate. But one night changed everything. On December 8, 2012, Brent and his teammate and close friend Jerry Brown were out partying in Dallas. Brown, a linebacker on the Cowboys practice squad, got into the passenger seat of Brent's Mercedes as they headed home. Brent, who had a prior DUI arrest, was drunk, well over twice the legal limit. Around 2:20 a.m., Brent lost control of the vehicle. It flipped and skidded to a halt on the highway. Brown was critically injured in the crash. Brent, somehow, was mostly unharmed. By the time emergency responders arrived, Brent had pulled Brown from the wreckage, but it was too late. Jerry Brown died at the hospital. What followed was both heartbreaking and uncomfortable. Brent was arrested and charged with intoxication manslaughter. He faced the possibility of 20 years behind bars. But the story didn't end with condemnation. At Brown's memorial service, his mother publicly forgave Brent and even embraced him. She later testified at trial, asking for leniency. Ultimately, Brent was sentenced to 180 days in jail and 10 years of probation, a punishment that divided public opinion. Some saw it as too light. Others pointed to Brown's family's wishes. Brent returned briefly to the Cowboys after serving his sentence, but retired shortly after. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Mark Chmura. In the 1990s, Mark Chmura was a fan favorite in Green Bay, a reliable tight end with great hands, and a strong connection to quarterback Brett Favre. He made 3 Pro Bowls, won Super Bowl 31, and seemed like the kind of player you'd want representing your franchise. But in 2000, that image crumbled. Chmura, who was married with children at the time, attended a post-prom party hosted by a high school student. That sentence alone was enough to raise eyebrows. But what followed sparked national outrage. A 17-year-old girl accused Chmura of sexually assaulting her in a bathroom at that party. He was charged with third-degree sexual assault, an offense that could have landed him in prison for up to 10 years. The trial gripped Wisconsin. Chmura had been a role model, appearing in family-friendly ads and community events. Now, he was on the front page for all the wrong reasons. His defense centered on consent and credibility. The courtroom heard about drinking, poor decisions, and blurred lines. Eventually, a jury acquitted Chmura of all charges. But even with a not guilty verdict, his career never recovered. The Packers released him, and most teams didn't want the media firestorm that would come with signing him. He later admitted the incident was morally wrong, even if not criminal, and said he brought embarrassment to his family and the Packers organization. Joe McKnight. Joe McKnight was once one of the most electrifying high school football players in America. So talented, he drew comparisons to Reggie Bush and was dubbed the next big thing before he even chose a college. He went to USC, was drafted by the New York Jets, and showed flashes of greatness as a return man and dynamic runner. But his pro career never quite hit the heights fans expected. Injuries, inconsistency, and coaching changes derailed his momentum. Yet it wasn't his football stats that made headlines in the end. It was his death. In December 2016, McKnight was shot and killed in a road rage incident in Terrytown, Louisiana. He was just 28 years old. According to witnesses, McKnight and another driver, Ronald Gasser, got into a verbal altercation while driving. At a traffic light, McKnight exited his car. Gasser, still seated in his vehicle, pulled out a gun and shot him 3 times. Initially, Gasser wasn't arrested, sparking public outrage. Many pointed to racial dynamics. McKnight was a black man, Gasser was white, and criticized what looked like lenient treatment. The sheriff's office said Gasser had not tried to flee and had handed over his weapon. But the public saw something else, a man who shot and killed someone in broad daylight, walking free. Eventually, Gasser was charged with manslaughter. At trial, he claimed self-defense, saying McKnight had made threats and reached into his car. But the jury didn't buy it. In 2018, Gasser was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Demetrius Dubose. Demetrius Dubose was a team captain at Notre Dame, a second-round NFL draft pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and by all accounts, a charismatic, intelligent, and thoughtful man. But his story didn't end with football glory. It ended in one of the most controversial police-involved deaths in NFL history. After his NFL career stalled out in the late 90s, Dubose drifted between business ideas and world travel. He struggled to find footing post-football, but kept pushing forward, investing in ventures, staying fit, and trying to find peace after the game. But in July 1999, while staying in San Diego, that journey was cut short. Dubose had locked himself out of a house he was renting. When police arrived to investigate a reported break-in, what followed turned tragic. Officers claimed Dubose was acting irrationally and refused to comply. Eyewitnesses said he was confused, but not aggressive. He was shirtless, unarmed, and high on a combination of alcohol and recreational drugs, according to the toxicology report. In the chaos, San Diego police officers shot him 13 times. 5 of those bullets hit him in the back. The public reaction was explosive. Dubose's family, teammates, and civil rights activists demanded justice. How could an unarmed man be shot so many times when there were other options? How could a promising life that had once lit up college football fields end on a sidewalk in handcuffs and bullet wounds? No charges were filed against the officers. The district attorney's office ruled the shooting justified, citing Dubose's resistance and perceived threat. But to this day, many view it as one of the darkest intersections between race, mental health, and excessive force in professional sports history. Cierre Wood. Cierre Wood once had all the markings of a future star. He was a standout running back at Notre Dame with speed, vision, and a nose for the end zone. Though he went undrafted in 2013, he bounced around NFL teams like the Texans, Patriots, Bills, and Raiders, always just a step away from securing a permanent spot. But his name would later reappear in headlines for something far darker than a roster move. In April 2019, Wood was arrested in Las Vegas. The charge? First-degree murder. Authorities allege that Wood and his girlfriend were responsible for the death of her 5-year-old daughter. The girl was found unresponsive in their apartment. The details that emerged were chilling. According to investigators, Wood had subjected the child to intense workouts as punishment, including wall sits and sit-ups, claiming it was discipline. He told police she needed to be toughened up. The autopsy revealed severe injuries, bruises on her stomach, back, legs, and arms. She had been repeatedly beaten. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the abdomen. Wood denied the abuse, but the evidence painted a horrifying picture of a man whose life had spiraled far from the field. The former running back, once known for cutting through defensive lines, was now facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. Malik McDowell. Malik McDowell was supposed to be a game wrecker. Coming out of Michigan State, he was a dominant defensive force, 6 feet 6 inches, 300 pounds, with freak athleticism. That rare blend of size and skill convinced the Seattle Seahawks to take him early in the second round of the 2017 NFL Draft. But McDowell never played a single down for the Seahawks. And what happened next would spiral into one of the most bizarre off-field collapses in recent NFL memory. Just weeks after being drafted, McDowell got into a serious ATV accident. The injuries were career-altering. He suffered a concussion and facial injuries that sidelined him indefinitely. The Seahawks placed him on the reserve list, but questions grew about his recovery and commitment. Eventually, Seattle cut him in 2018 without him ever appearing in a game. But the ATV accident was just the start. Over the next few years, McDowell's name appeared in police reports more than game day programs. He was arrested multiple times, once for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest at a gas station, another time for concealing stolen property after being found with a stolen truck. But the most infamous moment came in 2022. In January of that year, security cameras captured a surreal scene. A naked McDowell wandering around the premises of a children's learning center in Florida. Police reports described him as aggressive and incoherent. When officers arrived, McDowell reportedly charged at them. He was tased, subdued, and arrested. The charges? Public exposure, assaulting an officer, and resisting arrest. Body cam footage went viral, and the headlines practically wrote themselves. What made it all more tragic was that McDowell had seemingly redeemed himself, briefly. He had made a comeback with the Cleveland Browns in 2021 and played in 14 games, recording 3 sacks. But that moment of stability didn't last. Darren Sharper. Darren Sharper was supposed to be the golden boy, a 5-time Pro Bowl safety, Super Bowl champion with the New Orleans Saints, an NFL Network analyst after retirement. He had it all. Sharper was charismatic, media-friendly, and respected across the league, which is exactly what made his downfall so terrifying. Behind the charming smile and Hall of Fame caliber career was a secret double life. Between 2013 and 2014, disturbing allegations began to surface. Women across multiple states, California, Nevada, Arizona, and Louisiana, accused Sharper of drugging and assaulting them. What began as whispers became a full-blown national scandal. The details were horrifying. Investigators found a disturbing pattern. Sharper would allegedly meet women at clubs or parties, offer them drinks laced with sedatives like Zolpidem or morphine, and then wait for them to lose consciousness. These weren't isolated incidents, they were systematic. Eventually, the floodgates opened. Sharper was charged in federal and state courts, with authorities uncovering cases spanning 9 women in 4 states. The legal proceedings exposed the depth of his predatory behavior. Prosecutors even described him as a serial predator, one who used his fame to gain trust and then exploit it in the most disturbing way. Sharper pled guilty to multiple charges, including rape and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. In 2016, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison, a shocking fall for someone once seen as a role model. The NFL, silent. The league distanced itself quickly. His name has been scrubbed from highlight reels, his face disappeared from broadcasts, and his Hall of Fame eligibility basically erased from public conversation. Stanley Wilson Sr. The night before the Super Bowl is supposed to be sacred. It's the calm before the storm. The final moment of focus before the biggest game of your life. But for Stanley Wilson Sr., it became the moment that ended everything. Wilson was a running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, talented, explosive, and unfortunately battling a severe drug addiction. On January 21st, 1989, the Bengals were in Miami preparing to face the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 23. That night, Wilson disappeared from the team meeting. Coaches found him hours later, naked, shivering, and completely out of it in a hotel bathroom. He had gone on a cocaine binge the night before the Super Bowl. It wasn't his first offense, it was his third. And under the NFL's three-strike drug policy, it was his last. The Bengals were blindsided. Head coach Sam Wyche later said the locker room felt like a funeral. Wilson had been part of their game plan. His sudden absence and the disturbing circumstances surrounding it shook the team before kickoff. They lost the game in heartbreaking fashion, 20-16. And many within the organization believe the emotional toll of Wilson's relapse played a role in that loss. But Wilson's story didn't end there. After being banned for life by the NFL, his downward spiral continued. He was arrested multiple times throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, mostly for burglary and drug-related offenses. He eventually ended up serving time in prison, including a 22-year sentence handed down in 2008. Perhaps the saddest part is what could have been. Wilson was once a star at the University of Oklahoma and a third-round NFL draft pick. But his legacy isn't a career stat line. It's the tale of an addiction that robbed him of greatness and left his team stunned on football's biggest stage. Charles Grant. In the NFL, defensive ends are known for controlled chaos, fighting through 300-pound linemen, chasing down quarterbacks, and setting a tone of aggression. But in 2008, Charles Grant's aggression spilled into something darker. Grant was a key figure on the New Orleans Saints defensive front, a former first-round pick out of Georgia who had helped solidify the team's defense in the mid-2000s. He was respected for his power and intensity on the field, but off the field, one night in Georgia changed everything. That night, a fight broke out outside a nightclub in Blakely, Georgia, Grant's hometown. Details are still murky, but what's known is that a woman named Corinda Reed, a 23-year-old mother of two, was struck by a stray bullet and tragically lost her life. Grant wasn't accused of firing the shot, but he was indicted on involuntary manslaughter charges for allegedly inciting or participating in the fight that led to the shooting. For a man known mostly for tackles and sacks, the legal battle was jarring. The NFL didn't suspend him immediately, but the shadow of the case loomed large. He eventually reached a plea deal in 2010, pleading no contest to a lesser charge of public affray, a misdemeanor. He avoided jail time, but paid a fine and settled a civil suit with the victim's family. Grant's career never fully recovered. Injuries and declining performance saw him bounce from team to team in the final years of his NFL run, but his name never really returned to the spotlight. Not in a good way. Kellen Winslow II. He had the bloodline, the pedigree, the raw talent. Kellen Winslow II was supposed to be the next great NFL tight end, a torchbearer for his Hall of Fame father and a symbol of football royalty. But what started as a promising career unraveled into one of the darkest and most disturbing scandals in recent NFL memory. Drafted 6th overall in 2004 by the Cleveland Browns, Winslow was built like a wide receiver, but hit like a linebacker. His intensity was undeniable, sometimes too much so. He once infamously shouted in a college interview, "I'm a expletive soldier," after a brutal game. That energy translated into flashes of brilliance in the league, but also a slew of injuries, most notably a devastating motorcycle accident in 2005 that nearly ended his career. But it wasn't his physical injuries that defined the back half of his life. It was his criminal behavior. In 2018, Winslow was arrested in California on charges of sexual assault. The accusations weren't minor. He was accused of targeting elderly women, sometimes homeless, and assaulting them in parking lots, mobile home communities, and even his own vehicle. Over time, multiple women came forward with harrowing stories, and in 2019, a jury found him guilty of rape and other sex crimes, including indecent exposure and lewd conduct. In 2021, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. His attorney, and even Winslow himself, blamed CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the brain disease linked to repeated head trauma, and there's likely some truth to that. Doctors did report signs of frontal lobe damage, but for the victims, the diagnosis didn't erase the trauma. Kellen Winslow II went from being a Pro Bowl athlete to a registered sex offender locked away behind bars. Greg Hardy. Greg Hardy was once one of the most dominant pass rushers in the NFL. A Pro Bowl defensive end with 15 sacks in a season, he had the physical tools and swagger to become a face of the Carolina Panthers defense. But in 2014, his entire career and reputation imploded. Hardy was arrested and charged with assaulting his ex-girlfriend. The details were graphic and disturbing. She accused him of throwing her onto a bed covered in firearms and physically threatening her life. Though a judge initially found him guilty, the charges were later dropped when the accuser stopped cooperating. Hardy always denied the allegations, but the damage was done. The Panthers let him walk. The Dallas Cowboys took a controversial chance on him, hoping his talent would outweigh the baggage. It didn't. His on-field production declined, but it was his demeanor that sealed his fate. Hardy showed no remorse, got into sideline altercations, and made bizarre public comments that only intensified public backlash. When his NFL career sputtered out, Hardy tried to rebrand himself in MMA, an equally violent sport that only added to his polarizing legacy. But even in the UFC, his record was spotty, and controversy followed him. Alonzo Spellman. In the 90s, Alonzo Spellman was a beast on the field, an elite defensive end with unmatched explosiveness. Drafted 22nd overall by the Chicago Bears in 1992, he quickly became known for his terrifying presence on the line. But as his football career climbed, his mental health quietly unraveled behind the scenes, culminating in one of the most chaotic and unsettling breakdowns the league has ever seen. In 1998, teammates noticed something was off. Spellman began acting erratically, lashing out in meetings, and displaying increasingly paranoid behavior. It all came to a head when he had a full-blown psychotic episode on the front lawn of a teammate. Police were called as Spellman refused to leave, ranting incoherently, sweating profusely, and reportedly threatening to kill himself if doctors tried to sedate him. It took the intervention of teammate Mike Singletary, a devout Christian and father figure on the Bears, to calm him down enough to accept help. But that wasn't the end of it. In 2002, years after bouncing around the NFL with stints on the Cowboys and Lions, Spellman had another outburst, this time mid-air. While on a Delta flight, Spellman stripped shirtless, began screaming about bombs, and threatened passengers. The plane made an emergency landing, and Spellman was arrested. It later came out that he had bipolar disorder, a condition he had refused to consistently treat. He eventually served 18 months in federal prison for the incident. Spellman later spoke out about his condition, admitting that for years he denied the diagnosis and refused medication, believing he didn't need help. His story became a tragic warning about what happens when mental illness goes untreated, especially in a high-contact sport like football, where head trauma only makes things worse. He's since worked to rebuild his life, speaking publicly about his battle with bipolar disorder, and even becoming an advocate for mental health awareness in the NFL. Tamarick Vanover. He was electric with the ball in his hands. Tamarick Vanover was a human highlight reel, drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs in 1995 after a stellar college career at Florida State. Vanover made an immediate impact as a kick returner. In his rookie season, he became the first player in NFL history to win a game in overtime on a punt return touchdown. That kind of explosiveness made him a fan favorite. But while he was dazzling on Sundays, a darker life was unfolding off the field. In 2000, everything unraveled. Vanover was arrested and charged in connection with a massive stolen car ring based in Florida. The details were wild. The ring was smuggling stolen luxury cars to the Caribbean, using fake documents, middlemen, and shell companies to launder money. Vanover helped finance it. He funneled his NFL earnings into the operation and even helped coordinate logistics. And that wasn't all. Vanover later admitted to accepting improper benefits while at Florida State, part of a larger NCAA investigation that also implicated other FSU players. But while many violations were brushed off as minor infractions, Vanover's criminal case couldn't be ignored. He eventually pled guilty to conspiracy to transport stolen vehicles, served 2 months in federal prison, and was suspended by the league. By the time he returned to the field, the shine was gone. The Chiefs cut ties. The NFL had moved on. He made a brief attempt at a comeback in the CFL, but it didn't stick. For someone who once lit up Arrowhead Stadium with game-breaking returns, Vanover became a forgotten name, buried under court transcripts and federal charges. Penn State's Forgotten Predator, 1978. Before Jerry Sandusky ever became a household name, Penn State already had a Predator hiding within its football program. In 1978, linebacker Todd Hodney was a member of Joe Paterno's team. On the field, he barely made an impact. Off the field, he left scars that would last a lifetime. Hodney embarked on a violent spree of sexual assaults against women near campus. Authorities later described him as the most dangerous, physically imposing, and ruthless criminal they had ever encountered. His victims included students, young mothers, and women just walking home at night, all terrorized while Penn State football kept rolling toward national relevance. Hodney was eventually expelled from the team, but not before dozens of women had been attacked. After leaving Penn State, his crimes escalated. He was convicted of rape, and years later, of murder. For decades, his story was buried, overshadowed by Penn State's glory, years on the field, and later by the Sandusky scandal that defined the program's darkest chapter. When ESPN revisited Hodney's story more than 40 years later, it revealed a haunting truth. The warning signs had been there, but no one acted with the urgency needed to stop him. The program's silence left countless victims to suffer while football marched on. Northwestern's hazing disaster, 2023. In the summer of 2023, Northwestern, and university, better known for academics than athletics, found itself at the center of one of college football's ugliest scandals. It started with whispers about hazing inside the Wildcats' locker room, but what came out publicly painted a disturbing picture of systemic abuse. An internal investigation found a pattern of problematic conduct stretching across years. Former players described hazing rituals that included coerced sexual acts, degrading punishments, and forced nude drills. The allegations were shocking not only for their cruelty, but also for how normalized they had become inside the program. According to reports, some coaches allegedly signaled when hazing rituals were supposed to happen, while team leaders enforced them as a twisted rite of passage. What began as tradition crossed the line into humiliation and abuse, creating a culture where young players felt trapped, powerless to speak out for fear of being ostracized. At first, the university tried to quietly resolve it. Head coach Pat Fitzgerald, a Northwestern legend, was handed only a 2-week suspension. But when the graphic details leaked to the press, the outrage was immediate. Within days, Fitzgerald was fired after 17 years as head coach, and Northwestern's proud football reputation was in ruins. The scandal raised larger questions too. How could such toxic behavior persist for so long in a program celebrated for discipline and academics? It became a reminder that hazing isn't confined to small-time programs or obscure teams. Even elite universities can harbor a dark underbelly when accountability slips. Maryland's Deadly Workouts, 2018. In May 2018, the University of Maryland football program was shaken by a tragedy that should never have happened. During a grueling off-season conditioning session in the heat, 19-year-old offensive lineman Jordan McNair collapsed. Trainers initially treated it as simple exhaustion, but McNair wasn't just tired. He was in the early stages of heat stroke. For over an hour, his body temperature rose unchecked. Investigations later revealed the staff failed to administer the most basic and life-saving treatment, cold water immersion. By the time McNair was transported to the hospital, it was too late. He died 2 weeks later from complications of heat stroke. The aftermath was damning. Reports described a toxic culture under head coach DJ Durkin, one where players were driven through punishing workouts in a climate of fear. Speaking up meant being labeled weak, and even medical distress wasn't taken seriously. McNair's death wasn't just tragic, it was labeled preventable. The fallout was immediate and national. Durkin was placed on leave and eventually fired. Maryland's president publicly apologized to McNair's family. The university accepted full responsibility and later reached a $3.5 million settlement with his parents. But the deeper impact was bigger than Maryland. The incident forced college football to re-examine its training practices. The NCAA and athletic programs across the country implemented stricter workout protocols, emphasizing player safety and medical oversight. Notre Dame Tower Tragedy, 2010. On October 27, 2010, Notre Dame suffered a tragedy that had nothing to do with the field itself, but everything to do with the choices surrounding football. Declan Sullivan was a 20-year-old student videographer tasked with filming football practice. On that day, winds in South Bend were dangerously high, gusting over 50 miles per hour. Despite weather warnings, Sullivan was sent up on a scissor lift above the practice field to get overhead shots. As practice went on, the lift swayed violently. Sullivan tweeted from his phone, clearly terrified. "I guess I've lived long enough. This is terrifying." Minutes later, the lift toppled. Sullivan was killed when it crashed to the ground. Investigations afterward found Notre Dame had ignored repeated warnings about the high winds. There were no safety measures in place to prevent a student worker from being put in such danger. The state of Indiana fined the university for safety violations, and the decision-making of head coach Brian Kelly and other administrators came under heavy scrutiny. The university eventually reached a settlement with Sullivan's family, but the damage was irreversible. His death was not the result of a violent hit or an on-field accident. It was the result of negligence, a choice to prioritize practice footage over basic safety. The Seaberg suicide at Notre Dame, 2010. Just weeks after Declan Sullivan's death, Notre Dame faced another tragedy tied to its football program, one that raised even deeper questions about how the school protected its athletes versus how it protected its students. Elizabeth Lizzie Seaberg was a 19-year-old student at nearby St. Mary's College. In August 2010, she reported to campus police that she had been sexually assaulted by a Notre Dame football player. The days that followed were filled with fear. Seaberg received threatening text messages from another player, warning her not to pursue the complaint. "Don't do anything you would regret." 10 days later, Lizzie Seaberg died by suicide. The handling of the case drew immediate outrage. Campus police didn't interview the accused player until 15 days after Lizzie filed her report, and 5 days after her death. No charges were filed. Her parents later said they felt shut out by the university and misled about the progress of the investigation. To many observers, it looked like Notre Dame had prioritized protecting its football program over the life of a young woman. The tragedy became a rallying point in conversations about how universities address sexual assault, especially when athletes are involved. The imbalance of power, the delays in investigation, and the lack of transparency all left the impression of a system stacked against victims. The Booster from Hell, Miami's Nevin Shapiro, 2011. Few scandals in college football ever reached the level of salacious detail that came out of Miami in 2011. At the center of it all was Nevin Shapiro, a flashy South Florida businessman who ran a $930 million Ponzi scheme. While defrauding investors, he was also funneling millions into the Hurricanes football program as its self-proclaimed biggest booster. For nearly a decade, Shapiro provided Miami players with everything NCAA rules forbade: cash handouts, nightclub tabs, yacht parties, luxury hotel suites, jewelry, and even prostitutes. He once bragged about paying for an abortion for a player's girlfriend. According to Shapiro, as many as 72 players received improper benefits from him during the 2000s. He turned Miami's nightlife into an extension of the program, with VIP sections at clubs reserved for his players, stocked with champagne and attention. Players drove cars financed by Shapiro, stayed in his mansions, and lived like celebrities. To him, it wasn't just support, it was access. He wanted to be in the locker room, on the sidelines, and part of the Hurricanes' swagger. When his Ponzi scheme collapsed, Shapiro was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. From behind bars, he turned whistleblower, airing every detail of his decade-long relationship with Miami football. The NCAA launched an investigation, and while they couldn't prove every allegation, the damage was done. Miami imposed self-sanctions, including 2 bowl bans, and lost scholarships. The Hurricanes' reputation, once defined by dominance, became tainted by corruption. The Nevin Shapiro saga wasn't just a case of a rogue booster, It was a reminder of how easily the hunger for money, influence, and success can corrupt a program. Auburn players gunned down, 2012. On June 9, 2012, Auburn University was rocked by a tragedy that left the football community stunned. At an off-campus pool party near the school, an argument escalated into a shooting that claimed the lives of 2 former Auburn players and injured a current one. Ladarius Phillips and Ed Christian, both former Auburn linemen, were killed, while Eric Mack, a current offensive lineman, was critically wounded but survived. The shooter, a 22-year-old man with a violent history, opened fire after a dispute that reportedly started over a woman. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with dozens of students fleeing for cover as shots rang out. The suspect fled and sparked a manhunt that lasted several days before he surrendered to police. He was later convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. The murders sent shockwaves through Auburn, a school still basking in the glow of its 2010 national championship. Candlelight vigils drew thousands, with coaches and teammates struggling to process how their community could lose young men so suddenly to senseless violence. The Marshall plane crash, 1970. On November 14, 1970, college football suffered its darkest day. Marshall University's football team had just played an away game at East Carolina and was flying home to Huntington, West Virginia. On board the chartered Southern Airways DC-9 were 75 people, players, coaches, staff, boosters, and flight crew. As the plane approached Tri-State Airport on a rainy, foggy night, it clipped trees just short of the runway. The aircraft slammed into a hillside and exploded. Every single person on board was killed. Among the dead were 36 Marshall players, 9 coaches, 25 boosters, and 5 crew members. The crash devastated Huntington. Families lost sons, fathers, and brothers all at once. The entire core of the Marshall football program was wiped out. University officials even considered shutting the program down altogether. The grief was that overwhelming, but in the end, Marshall chose to rebuild. With the help of students, walk-ons, and transfers from other schools, the Thundering Herd fielded a team the following season. Though they struggled on the field for years afterward, the decision to keep playing became a symbol of resilience. The tragedy was later memorialized in the film We Are Marshall, but no movie can fully capture the pain of an entire team and community gone in an instant. The 1970 Marshall plane crash remains perhaps the most haunting moment in college football history, a story of unthinkable loss, and of a university and town that somehow found a way to carry on. UVA shooting on campus, 2022. On November 13, 2022, the University of Virginia experienced one of the darkest tragedies in college football history. A group of students, including several football players, were returning to campus on a charter bus after a class trip. What should have been an ordinary Sunday night turned into horror. A former UVA player, also a student at the university, allegedly opened fire on the bus. 3 football players, Lavelle Davis Jr., Devin Chandler, and Deshaun Perry, were killed. 2 other students were wounded. The attack was sudden and shocking, leaving their teammates and classmates traumatized. The shooter fled, sparking a tense 12-hour campus lockdown while police searched for him. He was eventually arrested the following morning, but by then, the Charlottesville community was in mourning. Candlelight vigils drew thousands of people. Teammates, coaches, and family members spoke of the 3 victims not just as athletes, but as beloved sons, brothers, and friends. In the weeks that followed, details emerged that the shooter had been on UVA's radar for prior behavioral and weapon-related issues. That only deepened the sense of frustration and disbelief. How could warning signs have been missed? And how could such violence erupt within a close-knit team environment? The remainder of Virginia's football season was canceled, an acknowledgement that there were bigger things than games to be addressed. The university instead turned its focus toward grieving, honoring the players' legacies, and healing as a community. Northern Colorado's murderous punter, 2006. In 2006, Northern Colorado University, a small program that rarely made national headlines, suddenly became infamous for a crime that sounded more like a tabloid story than a sports headline. Mitch Kozad, a backup punter desperate to earn the starting job, decided the only way to move up the depth chart was to eliminate his competition. One night in September, starting punter Rafael Mendoza was walking to his car in a dark campus parking lot when a masked attacker ambushed him. Mendoza was stabbed in his kicking leg, the very leg he used to punt. He survived, though badly wounded, and investigators quickly zeroed in on Cozad. The motive was as bizarre as it was chilling. He wanted the starting spot so badly that he literally tried to disable his rival. The case became national news, and Cozad was soon dubbed the punter who stabbed his competition. In 2007, he was convicted of second-degree assault, though the jury deadlocked on the more serious attempted murder charge, and sentenced to prison. Mendoza, meanwhile, eventually recovered but never regained his starting role at Northern Colorado. For a program that had little national visibility, the crime cast a long shadow. It exposed the extreme pressures and warped priorities that can emerge in even the smallest corners of college football. A position battle that should have been settled on the practice field instead turned into a true crime story that stained Northern Colorado's name. Army's cheating catastrophe, 1951. In 1951, one of the most respected institutions in America, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, was brought to its knees by a scandal that shattered both its football program and its honor code. That year, it was revealed that 90 cadets, including 37 football players, had systematically cheated on exams. At West Point, the honor code was sacred. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. The scandal showed just how far some were willing to go to keep star athletes on the field. Cadets had been circulating stolen exam answers and recycled test questions. Tutors were suspected of helping athletes bend rules, and the culture around the football team had allowed the cheating to spread unchecked. When the truth came out, the punishment was unprecedented. Every cadet involved was expelled. The impact on Army football was immediate and devastating. Just years earlier, the Black Knights had been a national powerhouse, producing legends like Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis. But with nearly the entire varsity roster dismissed, the 1951 team stumbled to a 2-7 record. What had once been a symbol of discipline and excellence became a cautionary tale. The scandal also shook the public's faith in West Point itself. Congress debated whether football had compromised the Academy's mission, with some even calling for the program to be suspended entirely. Ultimately, Army football survived, but the cribbing scandal scarred its reputation for decades. Woody Hayes' sideline assault, 1978. Woody Hayes was already a legend by the late 1970s, the face of Ohio State football, a Hall of Fame coach with 5 national championships, and a fiery personality who commanded both fear and respect. But on December 29, 1978, his legendary career ended in one shocking moment during the Gator Bowl. With 2 minutes left in a tense game against Clemson, Ohio State quarterback Art Schlichter threw an interception. Clemson's Charlie Bauman picked off the pass and was tackled along the Buckeyes' sideline. As Bauman got to his feet, Woody Hayes, furious and unable to control his temper, grabbed the opposing player by the jersey and punched him in the throat. The punch was caught by TV cameras and replayed across the country. Players and coaches rushed in to separate the melee, but the damage was done. Hayes, a 65-year-old icon of the sport, had struck an opposing student athlete on live television. The very next morning, Ohio State officials fired him. After 28 years as head coach, his career ended not with a championship or a farewell, but with disgrace. The incident became one of the most infamous coaching meltdowns in sports history. It overshadowed Clemson's 17-15 victory and permanently scarred Hayes' legacy. Though remembered for his brilliance and success, he's equally remembered for the violent outburst that ended his career. 1905, football's deadliest season. In 1905, college football nearly destroyed itself. The sport was wildly popular, but brutally dangerous. With no forward pass, players clashed in violent mass formations, like the Flying Wedge, essentially turning scrimmages into organized brawls. Helmets were primitive, protective gear was minimal, and refereeing was inconsistent. That year, the violence reached a breaking point. By the end of the 1905 season, at least 19 players were dead, and another 137 seriously injured. Fatalities included skull fractures, spinal cord injuries, and internal bleeding, tragedies that often involved teenagers barely out of high school. Newspapers dubbed it a death harvest, and public opinion began to turn against the game. One emblematic incident was the death of Union College halfback Harold Moore, who died of a brain hemorrhage after being kicked in the head during a game against NYU. His death and others fueled outrage across the country, with editorials calling football gladiatorial combat in disguise. The national outcry reached the White House. President Theodore Roosevelt, an outspoken fan of the sport, convened a summit with college leaders. He gave them an ultimatum: reform the rules or risk seeing football banned altogether. The result was a series of landmark changes in 1906. The forward pass was legalized. Mass plays like the wedge were abolished. A neutral line of scrimmage was created, and more emphasis was placed on player safety. These reforms saved the sport, laying the foundation for modern football. WSU's quarterback, suicide, and CTE, 2018. In January 2018, Washington State University quarterback Tyler Hilinski was found dead in his apartment from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Just 21 years old, Hilinski had started in the Holiday Bowl weeks earlier and was widely expected to take over as the Cougars' full-time starter the following season. His death shocked teammates, fans, and the entire college football world. At first, it was a mystery. Hilinski had seemed cheerful, hardworking, and beloved by those around him. There were no obvious warning signs, but the questions grew louder. How could a young man with such promise reach such a devastating breaking point? The answers came after his family agreed to have his brain examined. The autopsy revealed Hilinski had stage 1 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the degenerative brain disease linked to repeated head trauma. Doctors were stunned. They told the family that his brain looked like that of a man decades older, possibly in his 60s. His parents have said they don't blame football alone, but they believe the disease, combined with the pressures of being a quarterback, contributed to his depression. His younger brother, Ryan, later became a quarterback at South Carolina and Northwestern, playing in his brother's honor, while also raising awareness about mental health. In the wake of Tyler's death, his family founded Hilinski's Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to ending the stigma around mental illness in athletes and improving support systems on campuses. His story became a rallying cry for more open conversations about concussions, CTE, and the invisible battles young athletes face. Minnesota's boycott and sexual assault saga, 2016. In 2016, the University of Minnesota football program was engulfed in a dark and complicated scandal that blurred the lines between justice, discipline, and loyalty. It began when a female student accused multiple Gopher players of sexually assaulting her at an off-campus party in September. Police investigated, but ultimately did not pursue criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. However, the university launched its own Title IX investigation, and its findings told a different story. The inquiry determined that the woman's account was credible, and that at least 10 players had violated conduct codes related to sexual assault and harassment. In December, right before Minnesota was set to play in the Holiday Bowl, the university announced the suspensions of those 10 players. The team's response was explosive. Players held a press conference, announcing a full boycott of all practices and games, even threatening not to play in the bowl. They framed it as a stand for due process, claiming their teammates were punished without a fair trial in court. But then, the 82-page Title IX report was released to the public, detailing graphic allegations of group assault and corroborating parts of the victim's story. Once the disturbing details became public, the boycott crumbled. Support for the players' protest evaporated, and within 2 days, the team ended its standoff. In the end, 4 players were expelled. Others were suspended, and the program's reputation was badly damaged. The Holiday Bowl went ahead, but the scandal left a permanent stain. Penn State, Jerry Sandusky scandal, 2011. For decades, Jerry Sandusky was the face of Penn State's defensive dominance. He served as the defensive coordinator under Joe Paterno and helped build one of the most respected football legacies in college history. But beneath the surface, something horrific was unfolding. Starting as early as the 1990s, Sandusky used his nonprofit charity, The Second Mile, to gain access to underprivileged boys. He targeted them, groomed them, and in many cases assaulted them, sometimes in Penn State facilities. Reports later showed that multiple school officials, including members of the athletic department and even head coach Joe Paterno, had been made aware of concerning behavior. But instead of reporting him to authorities, they handled it internally, quietly removing him from coaching duties, but allowing him continued access to school facilities. In 2011, a grand jury indicted Sandusky. What followed was a national firestorm. He was eventually convicted on 45 counts involving 10 different boys. Joe Paterno, who had once been considered the moral compass of college football, was fired just months before his death. The NCAA responded with historic penalties, a $60 million fine, a 4-year postseason ban, scholarship reductions, and the vacating of 111 wins, stripping Paterno of his all-time wins record. Penn State had built its image on doing things the right way, and the scandal shattered that illusion. It wasn't just a failure of oversight, it was a culture of protection, silence, and denial that allowed one man to exploit young lives for years without consequence. Even now, Penn State is still rebuilding its reputation. The statue of Paterno was removed. The wins were eventually restored, but the scars of the Sandusky case remain. SMU death penalty, 1987. In the 1980s, Southern Methodist University wasn't just a rising football powerhouse. They were a national contender, pulling in top Texas talent and beating traditional giants. But beneath their success was a pay-for-play system so blatant, so institutionalized, that it forced the NCAA to do something they had never done before and haven't done since. For years, SMU boosters and university officials paid players under the table, offering cash, cars, jobs, and housing. The NCAA already sanctioned them multiple times, including placing them on probation 5 separate times between 1974 and 1985. But the payments never stopped. In fact, they were documented. A literal payroll list existed for players, organized by school officials and alumni. When the scandal finally came to a head in 1987, the NCAA dropped the hammer. They issued the infamous death penalty, shutting down the entire SMU football program for the 1987 season. No games, no practices, no scholarships. And the school chose not to play in 1988 either, due to roster depletion. The sanctions included scholarship losses through 1990 and recruiting bans that crippled the team. The result was catastrophic. Nearly every player transferred out, coaches left, attendance cratered. It took SMU over 20 years to return to national relevance, and some argue the program never truly recovered. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. The NCAA had made an example out of SMU, but they also realized the consequences were too severe. Since then, no other Division I program has received the death penalty. Miami booster scandal, 2011. In 2011, a man named Nevin Shapiro turned the University of Miami upside down. He wasn't a coach or player. He was a convicted Ponzi schemer serving 20 years in federal prison. And from behind bars, he exposed one of the most widespread and lavish benefit scandals in college football history. Shapiro, a longtime Hurricanes booster, claimed he had provided more than 70 players with improper benefits from 2002 to 2010. His list was staggering: cash handouts, luxury yacht trips, expensive jewelry, nightclub outings, VIP access to strip clubs, and even paid encounters with prostitutes, all funded by money he had stolen in a $930 million Ponzi scheme. He embedded himself into the program. He sat courtside at games, partied with athletes, and even had his own suite at the stadium. Players called him Lil Luke, a nod to fellow Miami booster and rapper Uncle Luke. Photos surfaced of Shapiro arm in arm with stars like Willis McGahee, Vince Wilfork, and Devin Hester. The NCAA later confirmed much of what he had claimed. The program tried to distance itself quickly, but the damage was done. Head coach Randy Shannon, who reportedly warned players to stay away from Shapiro, had already been fired. Al Golden, who took over in 2011, inherited a mess. Miami self-imposed bowl bans in 2011 and 2012 to soften NCAA penalties. The NCAA sanctioned the program with scholarship reductions and a 3-year probation, but many argued the punishment didn't match the scale of violations. Reggie Bush / USC, 2005. Reggie Bush electrified college football during his time at USC. He won the Heisman Trophy, helped lead the Trojans to national dominance, and looked unstoppable every time he touched the ball. But behind the highlight reels was a scandal that would ultimately erase much of what he accomplished on paper. While Bush was still in school, he and his family accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts from marketing agents, hoping to sign him once he turned pro. The benefits included rent-free housing for his parents, a car, travel expenses, and other luxury items, all in violation of NCAA rules at the time. The scandal came to light after a failed business relationship between Bush's family and the agents turned bitter. Lawsuits were filed, investigations were launched, and the evidence piled up. The NCAA findings were damning. Bush had received impermissible benefits, and USC had failed to monitor the situation properly. The fallout was historic. USC was hit with severe sanctions, including a 2-year bowl ban, the loss of 30 scholarships, and the forfeiture of wins from the 2004 and 2005 seasons. Bush voluntarily forfeited his Heisman Trophy, becoming the first player in history to do so. It was a major blow to the image of one of college football's most storied programs. Ohio State Tattoogate, 2010. Ohio State was a national powerhouse under head coach Jim Tressel, with BCS bowl appearances and a roster full of NFL-caliber talent. But in 2010, a scandal surfaced that started small and quickly spiraled into something that rocked the program. Several Ohio State players, including star quarterback Terrell Pryor, were found to have traded memorabilia, including jerseys, championship rings, and awards, in exchange for tattoos and cash. While the trades themselves seemed harmless to many fans, they were a direct violation of NCAA rules, which prohibited athletes from profiting off their status in any way. The real damage came when it was discovered that Tressel had known about the violations months before they became public and failed to report them. In fact, he had received emails warning him about what his players were doing, but instead of alerting compliance officials, he stayed silent. When confronted, Tressel initially denied knowledge, then admitted he had lied. The fallout was swift. Tressel resigned under pressure, ending his successful tenure in disgrace. Pryor was suspended and later left school early to enter the NFL's supplemental draft. The Buckeyes vacated all their wins from the 2010 season, including a Sugar Bowl victory, and were hit with scholarship reductions and a bowl ban. University of Michigan sign-stealing scandal, 2023. Connor Stalions was an off-field analyst with Michigan football, a former Marine who volunteered his way into the program. In October 2023, the NCAA opened an investigation into alleged off-campus scouting of future opponents, a direct violation of Bylaw 11.6.1, which bans staff from attending opponents' games in the same season. Evidence quickly pointed to Stalions. Investigators allege he purchased tickets to more than 30 games at 11 Big Ten stadiums, handing them off to associates to film sideline hand signals used by upcoming opponents. In one reported instance, Stalions was disguised in Central Michigan staff gear on the sideline for their game against Michigan State on September 2023, raising red flags about intent and deception. Michigan responded by suspending Stalions with pay, and by November 3, 2023, he resigned from the staff. Linebackers coach Chris Partridge was later fired, reportedly for counseling players on how to respond to NCAA questions about the scandal. Head coach Jim Harbaugh, while never linked directly to the scheme, accepted a 3-game Big Ten suspension that year for unrelated recruiting violations. Despite this, Michigan went on to win the 2023 national championship, and NCAA President Charlie Baker later stated he believed the title was earned fair and square. Some experts, including Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, have urged leniency, suggesting Michigan has already been punished significantly, but penalties are still pending and could include postseason bans, scholarship reductions, or more suspensions. North Carolina academic fraud, 2010 to 2017. At the University of North Carolina, the scandal that unfolded was systemic, and it went on for nearly 2 decades. The root of the controversy was in the African and Afro-American Studies Department, where a number of so-called paper classes were offered. These weren't real courses in the traditional sense. No lectures, no attendance, just a single paper required for a passing grade. Hundreds of athletes, especially football and basketball players, were steered toward these classes to maintain eligibility and stay on the field. While the university initially framed it as an academic problem unrelated to athletics, further investigations showed how deeply athletic staff were involved. Academic counselors knowingly enrolled players in these classes to help them stay eligible. Emails showed coordination between academic and athletic departments to guide struggling athletes through the easiest possible coursework. What made the UNC scandal different was the sheer scale. Roughly 3,100 students took the bogus classes over 18 years, and around half were athletes. But when the NCAA concluded its investigation, it chose not to punish the school, arguing that because non-athletes were also enrolled, it couldn't prove the classes were created solely to benefit athletes. The backlash was fierce. Critics accused the NCAA of letting a marquee program off the hook, despite clear evidence of academic manipulation designed to protect the football and basketball teams. It reignited debates about academic integrity and whether major programs were putting sports above education. University of North Carolina kept its banners. No wins were vacated. But the damage to its reputation, especially in academic circles, lingered long after the investigations ended. Jameis Winston allegations. Florida State, 2013. Florida State quarterback Jameis Winston was the face of college football in 2013, a Heisman winner and the leader of an undefeated national championship team. But behind the scenes, a disturbing allegation hung over his meteoric rise. He had been accused of sexual assault nearly a year earlier, and the case had quietly stalled. The incident in question occurred in December 2012, when a fellow FSU student reported to police that she had been assaulted by an unknown man. It wasn't until several months later, after Winston had emerged as a football star, that his name became publicly linked to the case. By then, much of the initial evidence had already gone cold. Witnesses hadn't been thoroughly questioned. The crime scene wasn't processed properly, and the Tallahassee police had essentially shelved the investigation without informing the accuser that the suspect was Winston. When the story finally broke in November 2013, it set off a national firestorm. Critics accused the police and the university of dragging their feet to protect their quarterback. There were concerns about conflicts of interest, especially given how deeply ingrained football was in Tallahassee culture. The investigation was eventually reopened under public pressure, but no charges were filed, with prosecutors citing insufficient evidence. Even though Winston never faced criminal charges, the fallout didn't end there. Florida State later settled a Title IX lawsuit with the accuser for $950,000. The university was also criticized for failing to conduct its own timely disciplinary hearing, as required under federal law. Throughout the ordeal, Winston remained on the field, guiding FSU to a national title and continuing his career unimpeded. But the scandal raised uncomfortable questions about how allegations involving star athletes are handled, especially when millions of dollars in school reputations are on the line. Baylor sexual assault scandal, 2016. Baylor was one of the last places anyone expected a scandal of this scale. A small Christian university with a rising football program, under coach Art Briles, Baylor had become a Big 12 powerhouse. But behind the success was a culture of silence, power, and devastating neglect. Between 2012 and 2016, a wave of sexual assault allegations emerged involving Baylor football players. Women came forward accusing multiple athletes of rape and assault, often reporting incidents to university officials. But rather than investigate thoroughly or hold anyone accountable, those in power, from coaches to administrators, appeared more focused on protecting the program's reputation. Internal reports would later reveal that Baylor failed to act on numerous allegations. In some cases, the university discouraged victims from filing complaints. In others, law enforcement cooperation was suspiciously absent. According to investigations, Art Briles and his staff knew about several incidents and either ignored them or worked behind the scenes to keep things quiet. One particularly chilling report alleged that Baylor football players had committed as many as 52 acts of assault over 4 years. The exact number was debated, but the culture of permissiveness was undeniable. The fallout was massive. Art Briles was fired. Baylor's president, Ken Starr, yes, the same Ken Starr from the Clinton impeachment investigation, resigned. Athletic director Ian McCaw stepped down, and the NCAA launched its own investigation. But what made the Baylor scandal stand out was how deeply the university failed its students. Football players were allowed to keep playing despite credible allegations. Victims were left unsupported. And the system, from the top down, seemed more concerned with wins and headlines than with justice. To this day, Baylor's handling of the scandal remains one of the most damning examples of institutional failure in college football history. Cam Newton recruitment scandal. 2010. Cam Newton's road to superstardom wasn't a straight shot. Before becoming a Heisman Trophy winner and national champion at Auburn, he was at the center of a swirling recruitment controversy that nearly derailed his rise. The saga began when Newton transferred from a junior college to Auburn in 2010. Almost immediately, questions surfaced about how and why he ended up there, especially given that Mississippi State had been heavily pursuing him too. Then came the bombshell, a report alleging that Newton's father, Cecil Newton, had solicited a six-figure payment from Mississippi State boosters in exchange for his son's commitment. And the NCAA launched its own investigation. Mississippi State coaches confirmed they were approached with a pay-for-play proposition. The evidence suggested that Cecil Newton had indeed asked for money. But crucially, there was no proof Cam himself knew anything about it. This technicality became the hinge on which the entire case rested. Incredibly, just days before the SEC championship game, the NCAA ruled Newton eligible. Their reasoning? While a violation occurred, Cam's lack of direct knowledge meant Auburn could keep playing him. It was a decision that baffled some and infuriated others, especially considering the NCAA's usually strict stance on impermissible benefits. Newton went on to win the Heisman Trophy and lead Auburn to a national championship. But the cloud never fully cleared. Critics argued that Auburn had escaped accountability on a loophole. Meanwhile, the case highlighted the murky world of college football recruiting, where families, boosters, and bagmen often operate in the shadows, while athletes claim plausible deniability. Despite the controversy, Newton's legacy remained intact on the field. Maurice Claret, Ohio State, 2003. Maurice Claret had one of the fastest rises and most dramatic falls in college football history. As a true freshman in 2002, he led Ohio State to a national championship, scoring the game-winning touchdown in double overtime against Miami. He was instantly a star, but within months, the fairy tale started unraveling. In 2003, Claret was suspended for the entire season after an NCAA investigation revealed he had received thousands of dollars in improper benefits, things like cash advances from boosters and free cars. He was also accused of lying to investigators about a stolen car incident involving a friend. The suspension effectively ended his college career. Rather than returning to school, Claret attempted to challenge the NFL's eligibility rules, arguing he should be allowed to enter the draft after just 1 year out of high school. The case went to federal court, where he initially won, only for the decision to be overturned on appeal. He was ultimately barred from entering the 2004 draft. By the time Claret finally became eligible in 2005, his stock had plummeted. He was a third-round pick by the Denver Broncos, but showed up to camp out of shape, and was cut before playing a single down. Things got worse from there. In 2006, he was arrested after robbing 2 people at gunpoint outside a nightclub in Columbus. When police pulled him over, they found 4 loaded guns and a bottle of vodka in his SUV, all while he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Claret was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison, serving over 3. He eventually turned his life around, earning a degree, speaking publicly about mental health, and founding a behavioral health agency in Ohio. Marcus Vick, Virginia Tech, 2005. Marcus Vick entered college football with immense hype. As the younger brother of Michael Vick, one of the most electric players in the sport's history, expectations were sky high. He had the same dual threat ability, the same cannon arm, and the same ability to make defenders look silly. But his time at Virginia Tech was defined less by highlight plays and more by headlines, and not the good kind. Vick's off-field problems started early. In 2004, he was suspended for the entire season after being charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He was accused of providing alcohol to underage girls and having sexual contact with one of them. He was also cited for reckless driving and marijuana possession that year. Even with the suspension, Virginia Tech gave him another chance. The university claimed he was undergoing personal growth and deserved an opportunity to redeem himself. But 2005 was chaos. On the field, he showed flashes of brilliance and helped the Hokies go 11-2. Off the field, the controversies piled up. During the Gator Bowl, Vic deliberately stomped on the leg of Louisville defensive end Elvis Dumervil, a move that caused outrage and circulated nationwide. Just days later, he was pulled over for speeding, going 38 miles over the limit, and driving on a suspended license. That was the final straw. Virginia Tech dismissed Vic from the program entirely. The university president said, "There is no more opportunity for Marcus Vick at Virginia Tech." He declared for the NFL draft shortly after, but went undrafted. The Miami Dolphins picked him up as a free agent and converted him into a wide receiver, but he never made an impact. His NFL career ended after just one season. Over the years, Vick has had more run-ins with the law, including charges of brandishing a firearm, DUI, and resisting arrest. He remains one of the most frustrating what-if stories in college football. Lawrence Phillips, Nebraska, 1995. Lawrence Phillips was the ultimate contradiction, a generational talent who constantly battled personal demons. At Nebraska, he was a powerhouse running back with NFL-caliber strength and agility, helping the Cornhuskers win 2 national championships under head coach Tom Osborne. But behind the scenes, Phillips's behavior raised red flags long before the public ever found out. In 1995, Nebraska had just dominated Michigan State when news broke that Phillips had broken into the apartment of his ex-girlfriend, a Nebraska basketball player, and physically assaulted her. He dragged her down 3 flights of stairs by her hair. The incident was brutal and public. The university suspended him immediately, but the backlash was intense. Yet, just 6 weeks later, Osborne reinstated Phillips to the team, claiming he believed football was the best structure to keep him from spiraling further. Many criticized the decision as a win-at-all-costs move. Osborne defended it as giving a young man a second chance, but it became one of the most controversial moments of his Hall of Fame career. Phillips returned to the field and played in the 1996 Fiesta Bowl National Championship game. He scored a touchdown and rushed for 165 yards, helping Nebraska cap off a 12-0 season. He then declared for the NFL draft, where the St. Louis Rams still took him 6th overall, despite widespread concern about his behavior. It didn't take long for those concerns to turn into headlines. He clashed with coaches, showed up late to meetings, and was arrested multiple times, including for domestic violence against a girlfriend. He bounced around to the 49ers, Dolphins, and even the CFL, but his off-field issues always followed. Eventually, Phillips was sentenced to over 30 years in prison for domestic abuse, assault with a deadly weapon, and other charges. While incarcerated, he was charged with the murder of his cellmate, then later found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide. Bobby Petrino motorcycle crash scandal, Arkansas, 2012. In April 2012, Bobby Petrino was on top of the world. He had just led the Arkansas Razorbacks to an 11-2 season and a top 5 national ranking. The program was thriving, boosters were happy, and Petrino was seen as one of the most brilliant offensive minds in college football. Then came the motorcycle crash. At first, the story seemed like a strange but harmless accident. Petrino crashed his Harley-Davidson on a quiet Arkansas highway, sustaining injuries to his neck and face. He held a press conference shortly after, wearing a neck brace and insisting he was alone at the time of the crash. The university released a statement backing him, and the situation appeared to be contained. But everything unraveled fast. A police report later revealed that Petrino was not alone. He had been riding with Jessica Dorrell, a 25-year-old former Razorback volleyball player, whom Petrino had recently hired for a position within the football department. That hiring skipped standard protocol and raised major red flags. As it turned out, Petrino and Dorrell were having an inappropriate relationship. Not only had he hired her out of a pool of over 150 applicants, but he had also given her a $20,000 cash gift, an amount that went completely unreported. When this information surfaced, it became impossible for the university to justify his continued employment. The university launched an investigation and concluded that Petrino had knowingly misled athletic department officials, failed to disclose the relationship, and violated multiple university policies. On April 10, 2012, Arkansas officially fired him with cause, meaning he received no buyout from the multi-million-dollar contract he had signed just a year prior. The scandal became a viral spectacle. The image of Petrino in a neck brace with road rash on his face turned into a meme overnight. But behind the public mockery was a serious reminder of how power, secrecy, and personal decisions could bring down even the most successful programs in a matter of days. Petrino's fall from grace was swift. Once regarded as a genius play caller destined for an elite program, he now had to rebuild his career from the bottom. He eventually returned to coaching, but the motorcycle crash and everything it revealed became a permanent stain on his legacy. Malcolm Butler benched in the Super Bowl, one of the most confusing coaching decisions in NFL history. It's February 4th, 2018, Super Bowl 52. The New England Patriots are facing the Philadelphia Eagles, and cornerback Malcolm Butler, he's a hero. Just 3 years earlier, Butler made the most famous interception in Super Bowl history, the goal line pick that sealed the Patriots' win over Seattle. He'd been a starter all year, played nearly every snap, and then he didn't play a single defensive down in the Super Bowl. No warning, no injury, no real explanation. When the Patriots' defense took the field, Butler was standing on the sideline, helmet on, tears in his eyes. A second stringer named Eric Rowe started instead, and the Eagles torched New England's defense for 41 points. Reporters asked Belichick after the game, why didn't Butler play? He just said, we put the players and game plan out there that we thought would be the best, like we always do. Rumors exploded. Was Butler late to a team meeting? Had something happened in the days leading up to the game? Nobody really knows. Thurman Thomas lost his helmet before the Super Bowl. It sounds like a bad sitcom scene, but it actually happened in the freaking Super Bowl. January 26th, 1992, Super Bowl 26. The Buffalo Bills were back for their second straight shot at a title, and their best player, league MVP Thurman Thomas. He was the heart of their offense, a dual-threat running back who could run, catch, block, do it all. But when it came time for the opening snap, Thurman Thomas was nowhere to be found. Why? Because his helmet was missing. Someone had moved it during the pregame chaos, possibly during the national anthem setup. When the Bills took the field for their first play, their MVP was standing on the sideline, helpless. Buffalo had to run their scripted opening plays without the guy they designed the entire plan around. And that's not just a minor detail. Momentum matters in the Super Bowl, and Washington took full advantage. Thomas eventually found his helmet and got in the game, but the damage was done. He finished the game with just 13 rushing yards on 10 carries, one of the worst performances of his career. The Bills would go on to lose, again. And this bizarre helmet debacle became part of the team's Super Bowl curse lore. Even today, fans still debate, how does one of the best players in the NFL lose his helmet in the biggest game of the year? Golden Tate allegedly slept with Russell Wilson's wife. This one's always hovered in rumor territory, but it's never fully gone away. In 2014, Russell Wilson suddenly filed for divorce from his college sweetheart, Ashton Meme, right in the middle of his rise with the Seahawks. No warning, no scandal, at least not at first. But then the rumors exploded. Some fans began to whisper that Golden Tate, Wilson's teammate at the time, had something to do with it. Specifically, that he allegedly slept with Wilson's wife, causing a total breakdown in their relationship. It didn't help that shortly after, Tate left Seattle, or that Percy Harvin supposedly punched him before the Super Bowl. Golden Tate publicly denied everything, saying, "In fact, my wife now, and Ashton, were best friends, and still are really good friends. In fact, Ashton came to our wedding. Every time I saw Russell, I'd be so angry. Like, how would you let this happen?" But even now, a decade later, it's still one of the most talked about NFL gossip mysteries of the 2010s. What was really said in the Myles Garrett and Mason Rudolph fight? This wasn't just a scuffle. It was one of the ugliest on-field moments in NFL history. November 14th, 2019, Thursday Night Football. Browns versus Steelers. With just seconds left in the game, Browns defensive end Myles Garrett took down Steelers quarterback Mason Rudolph. What happened next? Didn't even look real. Garrett ripped Rudolph's helmet off, then swung it at his head, connecting in a horrifying, dangerous moment that stunned everyone. Garrett was suspended indefinitely. The league called it one of the worst incidents ever. But then, the story got even murkier. A few days later, Garrett claimed that Rudolph had called him a racial slur, sparking the violent reaction. The NFL said it found no evidence of that after reviewing audio. Rudolph denied it. Garrett stood by it. No one else on the field confirmed hearing anything. And just like that, the truth was lost. Did Rudolph say something horrible that pushed Garrett over the edge? Or did Garrett just lose control and later try to justify it? To this day, no one knows for sure. The Saints Catholic Church cover-up. This scandal goes far beyond football. Back in 2020, leaked emails already showed Saints executives offering PR assistance to the Archdiocese of New Orleans amid a clergy abuse crisis. The team claimed they merely provided media support, not helping hide names. But critics cried foul. Fast forward to early February 2025, and more bombshell emails emerged. Hundreds of private team communications were released to the press, including messages from Saints president Dennis Lauscha and communications chief Greg Bensel. These emails reveal drafting questions the archbishop should answer, helping remove certain clergy from the abuse list, advising storytelling language to soften coverage. Later in May 2025, the archdiocese agreed to a $179 million settlement, but questions persist. How much did the team influence who made or got removed from the list? The NFL even stepped in. Commissioner Goodell said the league won't investigate, framing it as a matter for law enforcement. One survivor said the emails show a genuine lack of concern for victims, and suspect the Saints wielded their influence to protect clergy, not survivors. Emails also revealed that key political figures, like Judge Jay Zaney, were looped into this damage control network, suggesting deeper links between church, team, and civic leadership. But here's the thing. The NFL hasn't suspended a single Saints executive. No fines, no sanctions, just a quiet statement and a big payout, but no real accountability. So what's left unresolved? Did Saints leaders actively influence which priests were included or excluded on that list? How deep was the coordination behind the scenes? Why did the NFL, with decades of dealing with abuse scandals, refuse to act? This isn't just a PR mess. It's a question of morality and the potential for a sports team to use its power to shield abusers. The Dan Snyder front office scandal. This one was so chaotic, it's hard to tell where the mystery ends and the cover-up begins. For over 2 decades, Dan Snyder, owner of the Washington Commanders, ran one of the most dysfunctional front offices in NFL history. There were toxic workplace allegations, financial impropriety, and even accusations of secret surveillance. But one of the biggest mysteries, why did it take so long for the NFL to do anything? Let's start with what we know. Dozens of former cheerleaders and employees accused Snyder's organization of harassment and exploitation. There were claims of inappropriate videos being secretly filmed. Reports emerged that Snyder was allegedly involved in hush money payments. Congress got involved. There were hearings, subpoenas. The NFL even conducted an internal investigation, led by attorney Beth Wilkinson. But here's the catch. The league never released the full report. All we got was a summary, verbally delivered by Commissioner Roger Goodell. No transparency, no accountability, no paper trail. And despite the mountain of evidence, Snyder wasn't immediately removed. Eventually, after years of pressure, Snyder sold the team for over $6 billion. No punishment, no suspension. So the question remains, what did that report really say? Why did the NFL work so hard to keep it buried? And how many people knew what was really going on inside that building? Julio Jones's $100,000 diamond earring, lost forever? In July 2017, Falcons wide receiver Julio Jones, one of the NFL's best players at the time, was enjoying a summer day jet skiing on Lake Lanier in Georgia. Normal stuff. Until suddenly, in the middle of the ride, his $100,000 diamond earring flew off his ear and vanished beneath the water. Jones didn't panic. He hired a dive team. Scuba divers were sent down to search the lake bed for this one single earring, buried somewhere in 65 feet of murky water. They searched for hours, never found it. When reporters asked Julio if he was mad, he shrugged it off like a true wide receiver. It was insured. I was fine. And just like that, a six-figure piece of jewelry was lost forever. Somewhere at the bottom of a lake that already has a haunted reputation. And to this day, the earring has never been recovered. What really happened between Josh McDaniels and the Colts? This one still doesn't sit right. In 2018, the Indianapolis Colts were in full rebuild mode. They needed a new head coach, someone to bring stability and revive Andrew Luck's career. So they hired Josh McDaniels, the longtime Patriots offensive coordinator. The deal was done. The Colts announced it. And then, just hours before his introductory press conference, Josh McDaniels backed out. No warning, no reason. He simply changed his mind. People were stunned. Was it personal? Was it cold feet? Had Bill Belichick promised him the Patriots job after retirement? Reports swirled. Some said his family wanted to stay in New England. To make things weirder, McDaniels never explained himself. He just ghosted and went back to work in Foxborough like nothing happened. The Colts, blindsided, scrambled, and eventually hired Frank Reich, who did a solid job. But that moment, still one of the strangest turnarounds in NFL coaching history. Peyton Manning's wife allegedly ordering HGH. This one came out of nowhere and then quietly disappeared. In 2015, an Al Jazeera undercover investigation rocked the sports world. The documentary The Dark Side alleged that several high-profile athletes had received shipments of performance-enhancing drugs. One of the names? Peyton Manning. The report claimed that human growth hormone was shipped to Manning's house under his wife Ashley's name during the 2011 offseason, when he was recovering from neck surgery and missed the entire season. The implication was obvious, that Peyton had used Ashley's name as a cover to avoid detection, but Manning vehemently denied the accusations, saying he was furious and disgusted by the report. But the details were still murky. Why were shipments of HGH going to his house at all? Why under Ashley's name? The NFL investigated and cleared Manning. No discipline, no charges. But many fans still wonder, was there more to this story? It faded quickly from headlines, but for some, it left a permanent question mark on one of the NFL's most respected legacies. George Kokinis disappears from the Browns. This one was weird even by Cleveland Browns standards. In 2009, George Kokinis was hired as the general manager of the Cleveland Browns. A respected front office executive from the Ravens, Kokinis was brought in to help rebuild the franchise alongside head coach Eric Mangini. But just 9 months later, Kokinis was mysteriously gone. No press conference, no formal announcement. Reports said Kokinis was escorted out of the team facility by security. Some claimed he was fired. Others said he resigned. The team initially said nothing. Even stranger, the Browns later claimed that Kokinis had never officially signed his GM contract. That gave the team legal cover to avoid paying the remainder of his salary. Behind the scenes, rumors swirled that Kokinis and Mangini clashed over power, that ownership had second thoughts about the hiring, that Kokinis allegedly pooped on the desk of Randy Lerner, the majority owner of the Browns. But nobody ever went on the record. To this day, there's never been a clear public explanation about what happened, or why it happened so fast. The picked up flag, Lions vs. Cowboys, 2015. It was the most infamous flag that never counted. The 2014 NFC wildcard matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys was already intense. With under 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter, the Lions were up 20-17 and driving. On a crucial 3rd and 1, Matthew Stafford threw a pass to tight end Brandon Pettigrew, and Cowboys linebacker Anthony Hitchens was clearly flagged for pass interference. The referee threw the flag. The stadium announcer even confirmed the call on the PA system. Then, in an almost surreal twist, the refs picked it up. No explanation, no penalty, just play on. The Lions were stunned. the Cowboys took over, marched downfield, and scored the go-ahead touchdown. Dallas would go on to win 24-20. Detroit fans were livid. NFL insiders were baffled. Even former officials couldn't explain why the flag was picked up, especially when every camera angle showed it was an obvious penalty. To this day, the picked-up flag remains one of the most controversial no calls in playoff history. Some Lions fans believe it was a fix, others think it was incompetence, and the NFL never really explained it. Where did Barrett Robbins go before the Super Bowl? One of the most bizarre mysteries in NFL history happened the night before the biggest game of the year, Super Bowl 37. The Oakland Raiders were about to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but just 24 hours before kickoff, their starting center, Barrett Robbins, disappeared. No one could find him, not the coaches, not his teammates, not the hotel staff. Robbins vanished without warning. It wasn't until the day of the Super Bowl that he was located, in a manic, delusional state in Tijuana, Mexico. He reportedly believed the Raiders had already won and was allegedly celebrating a fantasy victory. He was immediately ruled out of the game. What came next was devastating. Without their Pro Bowl center, the Raiders' offensive line collapsed. Quarterback Rich Gannon was sacked 5 times and threw 5 interceptions as the Bucs cruised to a 48-21 win. Afterward, it was revealed that Robbins had long suffered from bipolar disorder and had stopped taking his medication in the days leading up to the game. The pressure, the moment, the mental instability, it all collided. Robbins would later admit he had no memory of the episode. He never played another game for the Raiders. The mystery still lingers, not just about the game, but about the mental health battles hidden behind the helmet. Jackie Wallace's disappearance with addiction. Jackie Wallace had everything. A college football star at Arizona, he was drafted in 1973 and went on to play cornerback in the NFL for the Vikings, Colts, and Rams. He even appeared in 2 Super Bowls. But after retiring in the early 1980s, his life took a dark turn. Wallace struggled with addiction, cycling through drugs, homelessness, and arrests. For years, he bounced in and out of shelters and recovery centers until one photo changed everything. In 1990, a journalist named Ted Jackson snapped a picture of Wallace sleeping under a highway overpass. That photo became the start of a friendship and a mission. Jackson helped Wallace get sober, reconnect with family, and even regain purpose. For decades, it looked like a redemption story, until 2017, when Jackie Wallace disappeared again. He left his home in New Orleans, and for 6 weeks, no one knew where he was. He had relapsed and vanished into the streets. His family and the media feared the worst. Eventually, he was found alive, but still battling the same demons. He's still out there, still struggling, still surviving. Randall Woodfield, the I-5 killer. In 1974, the Green Bay Packers used their 17th round draft pick on a wide receiver out of Portland State named Randall Woodfield. He was tall, athletic, and had just wrapped up a productive college career. Green Bay brought him to training camp, gave him a look, and then cut him before the regular season. What they didn't know was that they had just sent home a future serial killer. After football, Woodfield began a violent crime spree along the West Coast that would stretch across multiple years. Initially responsible for a string of robberies and assaults, his crimes escalated quickly. By the late 1970s, he was dubbed the I-5 Killer, targeting victims in cities along the Interstate 5 corridor, from California to Washington. Authorities eventually linked Woodfield to as many as 44 murders. He was convicted of one in 1981 and sentenced to life in prison, but he is suspected in dozens more. The number remains disputed, but his trail left behind one of the largest and most disturbing victim lists associated with any American criminal. Today, he's serving multiple life sentences in Oregon. His name rarely comes up in football history, but he remains, without question, the darkest individual ever to be drafted into the NFL. Chuck Hughes' only in-game fatality. On October 24th, 1971, during a late-season matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears, 28-year-old wide receiver Chuck Hughes lined up for what would be the final play of his life. With just over a minute remaining in the game, Hughes collapsed to the turf between plays. At first, players thought he was faking or cramping. Then, they saw him convulsing. The Lions team doctor and a Bears team physician rushed onto the field. So did an ambulance. As medics worked on him in front of 54,000 fans, players from both teams dropped to one knee. The stadium fell silent. His teammates stood around him in shock, praying. The image of Bears linebacker Dick Butkus waving frantically for help over Hughes' body remains one of the most haunting sights in NFL history. Hughes was rushed to Henry Ford Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The cause: a heart attack brought on by undiagnosed arteriosclerosis. His left coronary artery was 75% blocked. Amazingly, and almost unthinkably by today's standards, the game resumed after Hughes was taken off the field. The final minute was played out as though nothing had happened. To this day, Chuck Hughes is the only NFL player to die on the field during a game. The Lions retired his number, 85, and honored him privately, but the moment remains a grim outlier in league history. Jaguars Axe Incident, 2003. When Jack Del Rio took over as head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2003, he wanted to build a culture of toughness and perseverance. As part of that, he introduced a motivational prop in the locker room, a tree stump, and a real wood-cutting axe. The slogan was simple: keep chopping wood. Players were encouraged to take swings at the stump as a symbolic reminder to stay focused and persistent. Then, it backfired, literally. Punter Chris Hansen, participating in the team's new tradition, took a swing at the stump, missed, and drove the blade into his own leg. The injury was severe enough to require surgery and ended his season. For a team already struggling, losing a punter in a non-football accident was as surreal as it was preventable. The axe was removed from the locker room immediately. Del Rio, trying to downplay the incident, reportedly joked that he'd find a new slogan, but the damage was done. Kevin Allen, crack habit and prison sentence. In 1985, the Philadelphia Eagles used the 9th overall pick on offensive tackle Kevin Allen out of Indiana. He was big, powerful, and expected to anchor the offensive line for years. But within a season, it was already clear something was wrong. Allen struggled badly as a rookie. He couldn't keep up with pass rushers, missed assignments regularly, and was labeled one of the worst picks in team history. Eagles head coach Buddy Ryan was famously blunt about him, saying Allen was a nice guy, but he's got no athletic skills. Then came the off-field collapse. Allen tested positive for cocaine and was banned from the NFL for drug use. Not long after, things got even darker. In 1987, he and a friend were charged with sexually assaulting a woman in a New Jersey hotel room. Allen was convicted as an accomplice and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He served nearly half that sentence before being paroled. He attempted a football comeback years later in the World League, but his name had already become synonymous with disaster. O.J. Murdoch, suicide at Titans camp. O.J. Murdoch never played a single down in the NFL, but he was still under contract when his life came to a tragic end. An undrafted wide receiver out of Fort Hays State, Murdoch had bounced around colleges before finally breaking through with a standout senior season. The Tennessee Titans signed him in 2011, and though he spent his rookie year on injured reserve, the team brought him back the following summer for training camp. He never showed up. On July 30th, 2012, just days before camp, police in Tampa, Florida, found Murdoch unresponsive in his car, parked outside the gates of Middleton High School, where he had once starred as a prep athlete. He had died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Murdoch was 25 years old. The Titans were stunned. Teammates had expected him to compete for a spot on the roster. No public signs pointed to what he was going through. His death served as a painful reminder of the mental and emotional struggles some players face in silence. Brian Pata, still unsolved murder. Brian Pata was supposed to be in the NFL. The 22-year-old defensive lineman was a senior at the University of Miami in 2006 and widely projected as a mid-round draft pick. At 6 feet 4 inches, 280 pounds, he had started 3 years for the Hurricanes. known for his strength, intensity, and leadership. He had already declared for the NFL draft and was months away from achieving a lifelong dream. On the night of November 7, 2006, just hours after practice, Pata was gunned down in the parking lot of his apartment complex in Kendall, Florida. He was shot in the head at close range. No witnesses came forward, no surveillance footage was ever found, and no arrests were made. The case went cold for 15 years. Then, in 2021, police arrested Rashawn Jones, a former Miami teammate of Pata. Investigators believed Jones, who had a history of conflict with Pata, had been harboring resentment over playing time and a shared romantic interest. Despite prior interviews and denials, new witness statements and cell phone records helped lead to the indictment. But as of today, the case has not yet gone to trial. The murder remains unresolved in the eyes of the law. Devon Bess, police standoff. Devon Bess built a reputation as a reliable slot receiver during his time with the Miami Dolphins. Undrafted out of Hawaii in 2008, he carved out a steady 6-year NFL career, catching over 300 passes and becoming a key piece of Miami's offense. His story was supposed to be one of resilience, from a troubled youth to NFL success. But after leaving the league in 2013, everything changed. In January 2014, Bess was arrested at a Florida airport after a bizarre incident in which he removed his shirt, danced wildly, and shouted at law enforcement. He was held for a psychiatric evaluation, and concerns began to mount about his mental health. A few months later, he was arrested again in Arizona after barricading himself in his car during a police standoff. According to reports, Bess had posted erratic and disturbing images on social media in the hours leading up to the standoff. When officers arrived, he refused to comply, locked himself in his vehicle, and remained inside for several tense hours. Eventually, he was taken into custody without incident. After that, Bess vanished from the football world. Mike Kossin, sex addiction, rehab, and arrest. Mike Kossin had a short and largely unremarkable NFL career as a tight end. He bounced between the Jaguars, Bills, and Redskins from 2010 to 2015, mostly serving as a backup and battling repeated knee injuries. But what made Kossin a national headline years later had nothing to do with football, and everything to do with what came after. In 2014, Kossin began dating country singer and actress Jana Kramer. The two quickly married and became a high-profile couple in entertainment circles. But behind the public appearances, their relationship was falling apart. In 2016, Kossin entered rehab for sex addiction after admitting to repeatedly cheating on Kramer, reportedly with dozens of women. The couple separated, reconciled, and later released a book detailing their turbulent marriage, which included multiple relapses, broken trust, and therapy attempts. Their personal life became highly public, with Kossin often portrayed as the villain in the story. Then, in 2021, Kramer filed for divorce, citing infidelity and emotional abuse. Kossin was later arrested for violating a protection order filed against him by Kramer, further darkening an already painful narrative. Johnny Jolly, codeine trafficking charges. Johnny Jolly was once a rising star on the Green Bay Packers defensive line. A 6th-round pick in 2006 out of Texas A&M, he worked his way into the starting lineup by his second season. At 6 feet 3 inches, 325 pounds, Jolly was a disruptive force in the middle of the defense, known for clogging running lanes and bringing an edge to the Packers' front. By 2009, he was considered a key piece of Green Bay's future. But behind the scenes, Jolly had developed a serious addiction to codeine, commonly mixed with soda and candy into a drink known as purple drank. In 2008, he was arrested in Houston for possession of over 200 grams of codeine. While awaiting trial, he kept playing. But in 2010, the NFL suspended him indefinitely. That same year, he was arrested again, this time with over 600 grams of liquid codeine, and charged with felony possession with intent to distribute. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison in 2011. He served nearly 2 years before being released on early parole. Incredibly, Jolly made a brief comeback with the Packers in 2013 and played in 8 games. But a neck injury ended his return, and he never appeared in the league again. Tom McHale, painkiller overdose and CTE. Tom McHale played 9 seasons in the NFL as an offensive lineman, primarily with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He wasn't a star, but he was a grinder, smart, disciplined, and known for his toughness in the trenches. He retired in 1995, seemingly ready to move on from football. But football never really let go of him. After retirement, McHale began struggling with chronic pain. The hits he'd absorbed over nearly a decade had taken a toll, and to cope, he turned to prescription painkillers. Over time, the usage turned into dependency. He began doctor shopping, mixing medications, and losing control. His personal life unraveled. He entered rehab, but relapsed multiple times. On May 25, 2008, Tom McHale was found dead in a friend's home in Florida. The cause was an accidental overdose of oxycodone, cocaine, and alcohol. He was 45 years old. After his death, his brain was examined by researchers at Boston University. The diagnosis, CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. His widow, Lisa, became one of the early voices in the movement to raise awareness about head trauma in football. She later took a leadership role with the Concussion Legacy Foundation, advocating for player safety and research. Barry Bennett, murdered by his own son. Barry Bennett was a respected former defensive lineman who spent 11 seasons in the NFL, most notably with the New York Jets. A 4th-round pick out of Concordia College in 1978, Bennett carved out a solid professional career, appearing in 132 games and recording nearly 20 sacks. After football, he lived a quiet life back in Minnesota with his wife, Carol. But in August 2019, their rural home in Long Prairie, Minnesota, became the scene of one of the most disturbing stories in NFL history. The couple was found shot to death in their home, and suspicion quickly turned to someone they knew well, their 22-year-old son, Dylan Bennett. Just months prior, Barry had reportedly told authorities that Dylan had expressed homicidal thoughts and even mentioned wanting to kill his own parents while receiving mental health treatment. Despite the warning signs, Dylan was not institutionalized long-term. Investigators discovered that Dylan had stolen his parents' car and withdrawn large sums of money after the killings. He was captured in Mexico days later and extradited back to the U.S., where he was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. According to prosecutors, he shot both of his parents in the back and torso with a shotgun, then fled the state. Tony Washington, drafted despite a controversial past. Tony Washington was a physically gifted offensive tackle who stood out at Abilene Christian University for his size, technique, and relentless motor. But as the 2010 NFL draft approached, teams weren't just reviewing game tape. They were weighing a backstory that made Washington one of the most controversial prospects in recent memory. At age 16, Washington was convicted in Texas for a legal offense involving a 15-year-old who was his sister. The incident, while non-violent and involving 2 minors, resulted in Washington being required to register under the state's laws. He served his sentence and completed all legal requirements before returning to society and eventually football. Despite the incident, NFL teams knew the full story during the scouting process. Washington had been open about his past with coaches and front offices. Jimmy Hitchcock, caught in Operation Wax House. Jimmy Hitchcock once patrolled NFL secondaries with speed and intensity, suiting up for the Patriots, Vikings, and Panthers. But years after his playing days ended, he found himself at the center of a massive federal investigation. In 2009, Hitchcock was arrested and charged as part of Operation Wax House, a wide-ranging mortgage fraud and money laundering scheme. The operation uncovered a network of real estate professionals, recruiters, and straw buyers who worked together to inflate home values, falsify loan documents, and pocket millions in fraudulent mortgage proceeds. Hitchcock was one of several former athletes and public figures implicated. According to court records, Hitchcock played a role in recruiting participants and facilitating fraudulent transactions. Prosecutors allege that he helped move money through various shell companies and accounts, laundering funds from homes purchased under false pretenses. The scam affected dozens of properties in North Carolina and caused significant losses to lenders. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to nearly 4 years in federal prison. For many, it was shocking to see a former NFL player involved in such an elaborate financial crime. Nate Webster, sentenced after disturbing off-field conduct. Nate Webster was known for his hard-hitting style during his time as a linebacker with the Bengals and Broncos, but after his NFL career ended, headlines about Webster took a far darker turn. In 2012, Webster was convicted on multiple charges stemming from an inappropriate relationship with a teenager. The case revealed that the girl was the daughter of a former assistant coach, and court documents detailed how Webster used threats and intimidation to maintain control over the situation. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. During the trial, prosecutors described a pattern of manipulation and emotional pressure that spanned several months. The jury found the evidence credible and damning. The judge, overseeing the case, emphasized the seriousness of the misconduct and the need for accountability, especially given Webster's status as a former professional athlete. Eugene Robinson, soliciting a prostitute the night before the Super Bowl. Eugene Robinson had built a reputation as one of the NFL's most respected veterans. A three-time Pro Bowler and Super Bowl champion with the Packers, he was seen as a leader on and off the field. So in 1999, when he received the prestigious Bart Starr Award, given annually to the NFL player who best exemplifies outstanding character and leadership, it felt like a fitting capstone to his career. But just hours after receiving that award, Robinson was arrested in Miami for soliciting a prostitute. What made the story more surreal was the timing. It was the night before Super Bowl 33, where Robinson's Falcons were set to take on the Denver Broncos. According to police reports, Robinson approached an undercover female officer and offered her $40 for sex. He was arrested on the spot and taken into custody. The Falcons quickly posted bail to get him released, but the damage was done. The next day, Robinson played in the Super Bowl and performed poorly. He gave up a long touchdown to Rod Smith and missed key tackles throughout the game. Atlanta lost 34-19, and fans and commentators alike couldn't help but wonder whether the events of the previous night had impacted his focus. The fallout was swift. Robinson returned the Bart Starr Award, and the arrest became a permanent stain on what had otherwise been a commendable NFL career. It remains one of the most infamous personal scandals to ever unfold during Super Bowl week. Lambeau Field. Lambeau is one of the most iconic venues in football. It's historic, it's legendary, and it's the heartbeat of the NFL's smallest market. But when it comes to hosting a Super Bowl, the NFL has made it clear Lambeau will never get one. The reason is simple. Green Bay in February means freezing temperatures, heavy snow, and unpredictable conditions. The NFL wants the Super Bowl to be a global showcase, not a battle against the elements. Lambeau is perfect for a playoff slugfest, but it doesn't fit the league's vision for its biggest event. Then, there's the city size and infrastructure. Green Bay is by far the smallest market in the league. It doesn't have the hotel capacity, airport traffic flow, or public transportation network needed to handle the week-long spectacle that surrounds a Super Bowl. Thousands of fans, media, and corporate sponsors descend on the host city, and Green Bay simply isn't built for it. The combination of brutal weather and limited capacity has permanently kept Lambeau off the NFL's list. The league loves the history. They love the mystique. But when it comes to the Super Bowl, Lambeau is banned. Soldier Field. Soldier Field is one of the most recognizable stadiums in the NFL. It has history, it has tradition, and it's right in the heart of Chicago. But despite being in one of the league's biggest markets, it's banned from ever hosting a Super Bowl. The biggest issue is the weather. February in Chicago is brutal. Freezing wind chills, lake effect snow, and unpredictable storms. The NFL has allowed cold weather Super Bowls before, like New Jersey in 2014, but those games required massive infrastructure and luck with the conditions. Soldier Field simply doesn't provide enough assurance. Then, there's the stadium itself. Soldier Field is the smallest stadium in the NFL, with a capacity just over 61,000. That's well below what the league wants for a global showcase. Add in its aging design, difficult sightlines, and outdated amenities compared to newer domes, and it doesn't meet the modern Super Bowl standard. The location and logistics also matter. Chicago can handle conventions, concerts, and massive events, but Soldier Field sits on a tight plot with limited parking and complicated access. Moving tens of thousands of fans, media, and sponsors in and out isn't easy. The NFL prefers stadiums with smoother transportation options and more flexibility. Gillette Stadium. Gillette Stadium is no stranger to Super Bowls, but when it comes to hosting the Super Bowl itself, Gillette is off the table. The main reason is the climate. February in Foxborough means snowstorms, freezing rain, and single-digit temperatures. The NFL has experimented with cold weather Super Bowls, like New Jersey in 2014, but it prefers controlled environments for its biggest game, a snow globe. Super Bowl sounds fun for fans at home, but for the league's sponsors, media, and corporate partners, it's a nightmare scenario. The second problem is location. Gillette isn't in Boston. It's in Foxborough, about 30 miles outside the city. That distance makes logistics difficult. Hotels, airports, and major event spaces are all centered in Boston, but moving tens of thousands of visitors to and from a suburban stadium is a headache the NFL doesn't want for its showcase event. Finally, there's stadium design. Gillette is a great venue for regular games, but it lacks the retractable roof or domed environment that helps guarantee the NFL's perfect Super Bowl experience. Weather and exposure make it a risky bet compared to domes in places like Indianapolis or Atlanta. Mile High Stadium. Mile High is one of the most unique venues in the NFL. The altitude, the fan energy, and the backdrop of the Rockies make it an iconic football setting. But for the Super Bowl, the NFL has never considered it, and likely never will. The biggest obstacle is the weather. Denver in February is unpredictable. Some years it's mild, but others bring snow, ice, and bitter cold. The league doesn't want to gamble on conditions that could derail its showcase game. Cold weather Super Bowls are the exception, not the rule, and Mile High doesn't offer a roof or dome to mitigate the risk. The second factor is altitude. At 5,280 feet, Denver's elevation can affect everything from player conditioning to the flight of the football. While that's part of what makes home field advantage so strong during the regular season, the NFL doesn't want its biggest event played under conditions that change the nature of the game. There's also the logistics. Denver is a solid sports city, but it doesn't have the same hotel capacity, entertainment districts, and infrastructure scale that cities like Miami, New Orleans, or Los Angeles provide. Paul Brown Stadium. Paul Brown Stadium, now renamed Paycor Stadium, is a modern waterfront venue with a strong design and one of the better sightline setups in the league. But when it comes to hosting a Super Bowl, Cincinnati has never been in the conversation, and the stadium is effectively banned. The first reason is the weather. February in Ohio means snow, freezing rain, and ice. The NFL avoids putting its showcase game in open-air cold-weather stadiums without a roof. Paul Brown doesn't have one, which immediately disqualifies it under league standards. The second factor is market size and infrastructure. Cincinnati is a passionate football town, but it's one of the league's smaller markets. It doesn't have the hotel space, convention capacity, or entertainment footprint that Super Bowl week demands. The NFL uses the game not just for football, but for corporate hospitality, tourism, and global media, and Cincinnati doesn't check those boxes. Then there's competition. The Midwest already has nearby domed options like Indianapolis and Detroit, which meet all the NFL's hosting criteria. As long as those cities are available, Cincinnati won't be considered. Heinz Field. Heinz Field, now called Acrisure Stadium, is one of the most intimidating home field environments in the NFL. It's tough, loud, and famous for its swirling winds that make kicking a nightmare. But when it comes to hosting a Super Bowl, it's been effectively banned from consideration. The primary issue is, you guessed it, the weather. Pittsburgh in February means freezing temperatures, snow, and unpredictable wind off the rivers. The NFL has made it clear that Super Bowls in open-air cold-weather stadiums are a rare exception, and Heinz doesn't have a roof to shield the event from those conditions. Another factor is stadium design and amenities. Heinz Field was built as a football-first venue. That's great for fans during the season, but it lacks some of the modern luxury space and hospitality infrastructure the NFL requires for its showcase game. Then there's logistics. Pittsburgh is a proud sports city, but compared to other markets, it doesn't have the same hotel space, transportation flow, or entertainment footprint for a week-long global event. The NFL leans towards cities that can function as both a football host and a convention hub. Arrowhead Stadium. Arrowhead is one of the loudest, most intimidating stadiums in football. It holds the Guinness World Record for crowd noise and has become a fortress for the Chiefs. But for the Super Bowl, Arrowhead has never been in consideration, and the NFL has effectively banned it. Kansas City in February is harsh. Freezing temperatures, snow, and swirling Midwest winds are common. The NFL wants its showcase game to be played in controlled environments or in warm weather cities, and Arrowhead doesn't offer a roof to shield against the elements. Arrowhead is beloved for its atmosphere, but it's an older, football-only venue. It lacks the modern luxury boxes, club levels, and corporate space that Super Bowls demand. There's also logistics. While Kansas City is a passionate sports city, it doesn't have the same hotel space or entertainment infrastructure as other host cities. FirstEnergy Stadium. FirstEnergy Stadium, recently renamed Cleveland Browns Stadium, sits right on the edge of Lake Erie and is one of the most recognizable outdoor venues in the NFL. But despite its prime waterfront location and football-rich city, it's banned from hosting a Super Bowl, and the reasons are clear. Cleveland in February is brutal. Lake-effect snow, icy winds, and freezing temperatures are the norm. Cleveland is a passionate football town, but compared to traditional Super Bowl hosts, it lacks the scale of hotel rooms. The NFL views the Super Bowl as a corporate convention as much as a football game, and Cleveland doesn't fit that model. There's also stadium design. Built in 1999, FirstEnergy was designed as a functional football venue, not a luxury showcase. It lacks the modern suite space, VIP accommodations, and fan experience areas that the league emphasizes for its biggest event, Ford Field. Ford Field is one of the more modern indoor venues in the league, with a retractable roof design that eliminates weather as a factor. On paper, that should make it a candidate to host the NFL's biggest game. In fact, Detroit has hosted 2 Super Bowls, but the city has effectively been banned from hosting again. The main issue isn't the stadium itself. Ford Field checks a lot of boxes. It has the roof, the downtown location, and the seating capacity. The problem is the city and climate. February in Detroit is cold, gray, and icy. While the game itself would be safe indoors, the NFL cares about the entire Super Bowl week experience. Then, there's the reputation factor. Super Bowl 40 in 2006 was widely criticized for its atmosphere. The game was indoors and well run, but the surrounding city experience, the weather, the entertainment, and the overall vibe, was considered underwhelming compared to other host cities. The NFL remembers that, and it plays a huge role in why Detroit hasn't been given another opportunity. TIAA Bank Field. Jacksonville got its one shot at hosting a Super Bowl in 2005 with Super Bowl 39. The game itself went smoothly, but the experience around it made sure the city never got another chance. The biggest issue was infrastructure. Jacksonville didn't have nearly enough hotel rooms to handle the flood of fans, media, and corporate sponsors that come with a Super Bowl. To compensate, the league brought in 5 cruise ships to dock in the harbor and serve as floating hotels. It worked, but it became a running joke and a black mark on Jacksonville's hosting resume. Then there's the market size. Jacksonville is the NFL's smallest market city. It doesn't have the same entertainment footprint as other cities. The NFL doesn't just want to host a game, it wants to host a global event, and Jacksonville came up short. The stadium itself, while solid for Jaguars games, isn't enough to offset the logistical shortcomings. Despite renovations, TIAA Bank Field lacks the luxury suites, modern amenities, and surrounding infrastructure of the league's preferred venues. The weather in Florida was supposed to be the selling point, but even that backfired. Super Bowl 39 week was hit with cold, rainy conditions that dampened the citywide experience. For all those reasons, Jacksonville's one Super Bowl became its last. The NFL checked it off the list and then effectively banned it from hosting again. FedEx Field. FedEx Field has long been considered one of the least Super Bowl-ready venues in the NFL, and that's why it's banned from hosting the big game. The first problem is the stadium itself. Opened in 1997, FedEx Field quickly developed a reputation for poor design and fan experience. The upper deck is steep and far from the action, the concourses are cramped, and the amenities lag behind nearly every modern NFL stadium. Over the years, it's been voted at or near the bottom of league rankings by both fans and players. A Super Bowl demands luxury boxes, hospitality space, and state-of-the-art facilities, and FedEx Field simply doesn't deliver. The second issue is logistics. While Washington, D.C. is a major city with ample hotels, airports, and infrastructure, the stadium itself is located in Landover, Maryland, miles outside the city center. Public transportation access is limited, parking is chaotic, and moving tens of thousands of people in and out of the venue is notoriously difficult. For an event the size of the Super Bowl, those headaches are unacceptable to the NFL. Finally, the reputation factor matters. FedEx Field has become synonymous with malfunctions, leaking pipes, broken rails, poor turf conditions, and constant criticism from fans and media. The NFL isn't going to risk its showcase game in a stadium known more for problems than prestige. The Washington market is big enough for the Super Bowl. The city itself is strong enough. But as long as the team plays at FedEx Field, the game won't come there. That's why it's banned from the NFL's rotation of hosts. Bank of America Stadium. Bank of America Stadium sits right in downtown Charlotte and has been the Panthers' home since 1996. It's hosted playoff games, college football championships, and massive events. But when it comes to the Super Bowl, it's on the NFL's banned list. The biggest obstacle is the weather. Charlotte is warmer than northern markets, but February still brings cold snaps, rain, and the occasional ice storm. The NFL wants certainty, and open-air stadiums in climates that can swing unpredictable don't make the cut. Without a dome or retractable roof, Charlotte isn't seen as reliable. The second factor is stadium age and design. While Bank of America has undergone renovations, it was built in the mid-90s and lacks the cutting-edge amenities newer venues offer. Super Bowls are as much about luxury suites, corporate entertainment, and media capacity as they are about football. By NFL standards, Charlotte's stadium falls short compared to domed venues in Atlanta, Dallas, or Los Angeles. Then, there's competition in the region. Atlanta has Mercedes-Benz Stadium, a state-of-the-art dome that already hosted a Super Bowl. With such a premier venue just a few hours away, the league has little incentive to place its biggest event in Charlotte. Lumen Field. Lumen Field is one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL. The 12S have turned it into a fortress, and the venue is famous for seismic crowd noise and a unique open-air design. But despite its energy and setting, the NFL has ruled it out for hosting a Super Bowl. Seattle in February is cold, wet, and unpredictable. While the city doesn't get the deep snow of northern markets, it gets constant rain, gray skies, and slick playing conditions. The NFL doesn't want to gamble on its biggest game turning into a rain-soaked mess, especially in an open-air stadium without a roof. Lumen Field is optimized for noise and atmosphere, not luxury. It doesn't have the same hospitality space, corporate suites, or high-end amenities the league prioritizes for its showcase event. Seattle is a great sports city, but its layout poses challenges. Limited hotel space near the stadium, traffic congestion, and a downtown that isn't as convention-friendly as cities like Las Vegas or Miami make it less appealing to the league. Lincoln Financial Field. Lincoln Financial Field is one of the premier home field environments in the NFL. The Eagles' fans, the atmosphere, and the modern design make it one of the toughest places to play. But when it comes to the Super Bowl, it's been kept off the list. Philadelphia in February is cold, often snowy, and unpredictable. The NFL has been clear. Unless a northern stadium has a roof, it won't be considered. The only exception so far was MetLife Stadium in 2014, and that required a perfect storm of circumstances. Lincoln Financial Field is open air, which makes it a non-starter. The second issue is stadium design versus Super Bowl standards. The Link is a solid, modern stadium for regular season and playoff football. But for the Super Bowl, the league wants over-the-top luxury spaces, high-end suites, and massive hospitality areas. Lincoln Financial Field doesn't check those boxes to the level of newer venues in Las Vegas, Los Angeles, or even Minneapolis. Then there's competition in the region, with New York and New Jersey already having hosted a Super Bowl and domed options like Indianapolis and Detroit in range. Philadelphia doesn't bring the kind of unique draw that would make the NFL bend its own rules. Deshaun Watson, $5 million. The biggest fine in NFL history didn't come from an illegal hit, a dirty play, or even a coach cheating. It came from a quarterback whose misconduct off the field changed the way the league handled discipline. In 2022, Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson was fined $5 million by the NFL after facing more than 24 allegations of sexual misconduct. Along with the fine, he received an 11-game suspension, one of the harshest punishments ever handed down to a star player. The fine itself wasn't random. It came as part of a negotiated settlement between the NFL and the Players Association after a neutral disciplinary officer had initially suggested a lighter suspension. The league pushed back, saying Watson's actions warranted a more severe response. The $5 million fine set a new benchmark, making it clear the NFL wanted to send a message about personal conduct. Unlike most fines, which are about money lost from a paycheck, this was a direct financial penalty, a way to hit Watson's wallet as hard as his reputation. And even though Watson signed a fully guaranteed $230 million contract with Cleveland, the sheer size of the fine made history.
Ndamakong Suh,
$100,000. Most NFL fines come from routine violations, late hits, unsportsmanlike conduct, uniform mishaps. But in 2013,
Ndamakong Suh
of the Detroit Lions picked up one of the biggest on-field fines ever handed to a player. It happened in a Week 1 game against the Minnesota Vikings. After an interception, Suh went low on center John Sullivan, delivering a block far away from the ball. It wasn't just unnecessary, it was dangerous. Sullivan was blindsided, and the hit risked a serious knee injury. The NFL, already cracking down on player safety, came down hard. The league fined Suh $100,000, the largest fine for on-field conduct at the time. Unlike suspensions, which cost players money from missed games, this was a direct penalty, and it sent a clear message. Cheap shots against vulnerable players would not be tolerated.
For Suh,
it wasn't his first run-in with the league office. By 2013, he already had a reputation as one of the league's dirtiest players, having been fined or suspended multiple times for hits and stomps. This fine, though, stood out because of its sheer size and because it showed the NFL was willing to set an example. Suh appealed, but the fine held. It became a defining part of his career narrative, a reminder of how his aggressive style often crossed the line and how expensive those choices could be. Bill Belichick, $500,000. The largest fine ever handed to an NFL coach came in 2007, and it was aimed squarely at Bill Belichick, the mastermind of the New England Patriots dynasty. The scandal became known as Spygate. That season, the Patriots were caught videotaping the New York Jets defensive coaches as they signaled plays during a game. While stealing signs isn't against the rules in itself, using video equipment on the sidelines to do it was a direct violation of league policy. When the story broke, it shook the NFL. Critics argued the Patriots had gained an unfair edge for years, raising questions about how much of their success had been aided by off-field tactics. Commissioner Roger Goodell came down harder on Belichick than any coach before him. The league fined him $500,000, the maximum amount allowed under NFL rules. On top of that, the Patriots organization was fined $250,000 and stripped of their 2008 first-round draft pick, one of the harshest punishments ever handed to a team. Belichick accepted the fine, but offered little public remorse, insisting the illegal filming had not given New England any real competitive advantage. Still, the penalty stood, and the $500,000 remains the single largest fine ever for a coach. Spygate didn't derail the Patriots dynasty. They went on to win 3 more Super Bowls after the scandal, but it cemented Belichick's reputation as both a genius and a rule bender, and it showed the NFL was willing to impose historic fines when the integrity of the game itself was at stake. Jamal Lewis, $760,000. Jamal Lewis was a powerhouse running back for the Baltimore Ravens, best remembered for his 2,000-yard rushing season in 2003. But just a year later, he made headlines for a very different reason, one that came with one of the largest fines ever handed to a player. In 2004, Lewis pleaded guilty to using a cell phone to help arrange a drug transaction with an undercover informant. Though the deal never went through, the legal consequences were severe. He was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison, plus 2 months in a halfway house, and the NFL added its own punishment. Along with a 2-game suspension, the league fined Lewis an eye-watering $760,000. The number was so high because it included salary forfeited during his suspension. essentially making it one of the most expensive disciplinary actions ever for an individual player. Unlike fines for dirty hits or uniform violations, this wasn't about football. It was about protecting the league's image. The NFL made it clear that off-field conduct could carry financial consequences, just as severe as anything done between the lines. Lewis served his sentence, returned to the field, and went on to finish his career with over 10,000 rushing yards. James Harrison, over $100,000. James Harrison built his reputation as one of the most feared linebackers in NFL history. A 5-time Pro Bowler and the 2008 Defensive Player of the Year, he played with an edge that terrified quarterbacks and ball carriers alike. But that edge also came at a price, literally. In the 2010 season alone, Harrison was fined more than $100,000 by the league for repeated violations of player safety rules. Most of those came from illegal or high hits on quarterbacks and receivers. One infamous game in October 2010 saw him lay out 2 Cleveland Browns players with helmet-to-helmet hits in the same afternoon. The NFL fined him $75,000 for that performance alone. Harrison made no secret of his disdain for the fines. He argued that the NFL was softening the game and targeting him unfairly. At one point, he even said he considered retiring rather than changing the way he played. "If I get fined for hitting too hard, then I'll keep getting fined," he said. "That's how I play." The league, however, was in the middle of a massive push to address concussions and protect offensive players, especially quarterbacks. Harrison's style, old school, physical, and violent, became a flashpoint in that debate. By the time his career was done, Harrison had accumulated well over $150,000 in fines. Vontaze Burfict, $112,000. Vontaze Burfict's entire NFL career was defined by controversy. An incredibly talented linebacker, he played with an intensity that often crossed the line into recklessness. And in 2018, that style cost him one of the largest single-game fines ever handed to a player. During a game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, his longtime rivals, Burfict was flagged for multiple unnecessary roughness penalties. One was a helmet-to-helmet hit on wide receiver Antonio Brown. Another was a late shot on running back James Conner. The NFL reviewed the game afterward and handed Burfict a $112,000 fine, at the time, the largest ever, for on-field conduct in a single game. The punishment didn't come in a vacuum. Burfict already had a long track record of dangerous hits, suspensions, and fines. In fact, he was one of the league's most fined players in history, racking up over $4 million in lost salary from suspensions across his career. The 2018 fine was meant to be a statement from the NFL that his style of play was no longer acceptable. Just a year later, in 2019, Burfict delivered another helmet-to-helmet hit, this time on Colts tight end Jack Doyle, and the league suspended him for the rest of the season. It was the longest suspension ever for on-field violence, and it effectively ended his career. Albert Haynesworth, $190,000. In 2006, Albert Haynesworth went from Pro Bowl defensive tackle to the face of one of the ugliest incidents in NFL history. During a game between the Tennessee Titans and Dallas Cowboys, tempers boiled over. After a play near the goal line, Cowboys center Andre Garrod lost his helmet in the scrum. Haynesworth stood over him, then deliberately stomped down, his cleat striking Garrod's unprotected face. The stomp opened a gruesome gash that required 30 stitches. Garrod was lucky not to lose an eye. The NFL responded swiftly, handing Haynesworth a 5-game suspension without pay, the longest suspension in league history at the time for on-field violence. The suspension cost him $190,000 in salary, a staggering amount for missing just over a month of play. Haynesworth publicly apologized, saying his actions were inexcusable, but the damage to his reputation lingered for years. Even though he later signed a $100 million contract with Washington in 2009, he was never able to fully escape the shadow of that incident. Brandon Marshall, $10,500. Sometimes, the NFL's fines have nothing to do with dirty hits or suspensions. They come from strict uniform rules. In 2013, Chicago Bears wide receiver Brandon Marshall found that out the hard way. On October 10th, during a nationally televised game against the New York Giants, Marshall wore bright green cleats. It wasn't a fashion statement, it was a message. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the NFL, and players are encouraged to wear pink gear. Marshall chose green instead to raise awareness for mental health, an issue deeply personal to him. The problem? The NFL's uniform policy is notoriously strict. Anything outside the approved color scheme is considered a violation. After the game, Marshall revealed he had expected a fine, but wore the cleats anyway to make his point. The league followed through with a $10,500 penalty. To Marshall, it was worth it. He matched the fine with a donation to his mental health foundation and used the incident to bring more attention to his cause. He later said, "Sometimes you have to take a stand." Chad Johnson, $30,000. Chad Johnson, better known as Ocho Cinco at the time, was one of the NFL's most colorful personalities. He built his reputation as much on his elaborate touchdown celebrations as on his playmaking ability. But in 2009, one celebration ended up costing him a serious fine. After scoring against the Baltimore Ravens, Johnson ran to the sideline and grabbed a sombrero and poncho, props he had stashed ahead of time. He put them on in the end zone and played it up for the cameras, grinning as the crowd roared. It was classic Ocho Cinco, playful, over the top, and headline grabbing. The NFL, however, didn't share the laughter. The league fined him $30,000 for violating its strict uniform and celebration rules. At the time, the NFL was cracking down on excessive celebrations, and Johnson's use of props crossed the line. For Johnson, the fine was just another chapter in his persona as the league's showman. He once joked that he kept money set aside specifically to pay for fines. Knowing his antics would draw league attention, fans loved it, but the NFL wanted tighter control over the image of the game. Marshawn Lynch, $75,000. Marshawn Lynch's relationship with the media was as famous as his running style. He was a dominant, punishing back, nicknamed Beast Mode, but he hated interviews. Time after time, Lynch avoided talking to reporters, often giving one-word answers or skipping media availability altogether. By 2015, the NFL had grown tired of his standoffs with the press. After the NFC Championship game, Lynch once again refused to meet his media obligations. The league hit him with a $75,000 fine, one of the largest ever tied to skipping interviews. This wasn't his first clash with the NFL over media rules. Earlier that same season, he made headlines during Super Bowl week when he showed up to mandatory press sessions and answered every question with the same phrase, "I'm just here so I won't get fined." The line became iconic, a meme across sports and pop culture, and a perfect symbol of Lynch's stubborn standoff with the league. The $75,000 fine reinforced how serious the NFL is about its media obligations. For the league, players speaking to reporters is part of the business model, fueling coverage, storylines, and sponsorships. For Lynch, it was a distraction he wanted no part of. In the end, Lynch turned the tension into part of his persona. Antonio Brown, $54,000. Antonio Brown's career is remembered as much for its controversies as for its brilliance on the field. In 2018, while still with the Pittsburgh Steelers, his clashes with team rules and discipline came to a head, and his wallet paid the price. That year, Brown was fined by the team for repeated violations of team policy. Specifically, he was docked for missing practices and showing up late to team meetings, a pattern that had frustrated coaches and teammates. The fine came at a time when Brown's relationship with the Steelers was already unraveling, with tensions boiling over between him, quarterback
Ben Roethlisberger,
and head coach Mike Tomlin. The fines weren't isolated. Brown's career was littered with league and team penalties for everything from dangerous hits on defenders to uniform violations. But the $54,000 fine happened in 2019 when he was with the Raiders. He posted a letter showing the amount of the fine. It foreshadowed the chaotic exits and off-field drama that would follow him until retirement. Washington football team, $10 million. While most fines in NFL history have targeted players or coaches, the largest financial penalty ever imposed on a franchise came in 2021 when the league hit the Washington football team, now Commanders, with a staggering $10 million fine. This wasn't about on-field behavior. It stemmed from a lengthy league investigation into Washington's workplace culture under longtime owner Dan Snyder. The inquiry found a pattern of systemic misconduct and harassment stretching over years. Female employees described a toxic environment filled with intimidation, verbal abuse, and repeated allegations of sexual harassment by executives and team officials. The NFL's investigation concluded that Washington's workplace was highly unprofessional, with failures in both leadership and accountability. Snyder himself stepped back from day-to-day team operations, handing responsibilities to his wife, Tanya Snyder. But for many critics, the $10 million fine felt light compared to the severity of the allegations, especially since much of the investigation's findings were not released publicly, sparking further controversy about transparency. The fine was meant to punish the organization as a whole, not just one person. It was also symbolic. The NFL wanted to signal that off-field culture and the treatment of employees mattered just as much as player discipline. But for many, the punishment highlighted the league's uneven record in handling workplace scandals. Marlon Humphrey, $45,020. Baltimore Ravens cornerback. Marlon Humphrey has built a reputation as one of the NFL's most physical defensive backs. He plays aggressively at the line, presses receivers hard, and never shies away from contact. But in the 2024 playoffs, that physicality cost him a massive fine. During a postseason matchup against the Buffalo Bills, Humphrey delivered a helmet-to-helmet hit on a receiver, the kind of dangerous contact the NFL has tried to eliminate in recent years. The league reviewed the play and fined him $45,020, nearly double what he'd been fined for a similar infraction earlier in his career. It wasn't an isolated incident either. Humphrey has had a history of drawing penalties and fines for hits deemed outside the rules. For the NFL, this was about sending a message. Repeated violations of player safety rules would come with increasingly steep financial consequences. For Humphrey, the fine was another reminder of the thin line between being a tough, physical defender and one who crosses into unsafe territory. Cornerbacks thrive on intimidation, but the league has made it clear that shots to the head won't be tolerated, even in the high stakes of the playoffs. Patriots, Tom Brady, $1 million. One of the NFL's most infamous scandals wasn't just about deflated footballs. It also carried one of the largest team fines in league history. In 2015, after a months-long investigation into Deflategate, the NFL fined the New England Patriots $1 million and stripped them of 2 draft picks, including a first-rounder. The controversy started after the AFC Championship game against the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts accused the Patriots of using underinflated footballs, which would have made them easier to grip and throw in the cold, rainy conditions. The league launched an investigation, and the Wells report concluded it was more probable than not that Patriots staff had intentionally deflated footballs, and that Tom Brady was likely aware of it. The punishment was massive. The Patriots were fined $1 million and lost a first-round draft pick, 2016, and a fourth-round pick, 2017. Tom Brady was suspended 4 games to start the 2016 season. Patriots owner Robert Kraft blasted the fine as unprecedented and insisted the team did nothing wrong. Brady fought his suspension in court before eventually serving it. The entire saga became a media circus, dominating NFL headlines for over a year. In hindsight, the $1 million fine was as much about the Patriots' reputation as the footballs themselves. By then, the franchise was already viewed as rule benders thanks to Spygate, and the NFL seemed determined to make an example of them. Jameson Williams, $25,325. Detroit Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams has already shown flashes of being one of the league's most dangerous deep threats. But in 2024, he found himself making headlines for something other than his speed. After scoring a 61-yard touchdown, Williams punctuated the moment with an obscene gesture toward the crowd. The NFL quickly responded, fining him $25,325. It wasn't his first run-in with league discipline that year. By that point in the season, Williams had already racked up more than $70,000 in fines for various infractions, mostly unsportsmanlike conduct and taunting penalties. His growing track record made this particular fine even steeper than usual. The NFL often escalates penalties for repeat offenders. For the Lions, the fine was a frustrating reminder of the balance young stars have to strike between emotion and professionalism. Williams' talent on the field was undeniable, but the league made it clear that his behavior after the whistle was costing him, literally. While $25,325 is a fraction of his salary, fines like these add up quickly. Frankie Louvu, $33,766. Washington Commanders linebacker Frankie Louvu has built his reputation as a relentless, high-motor defender who never takes a snap off. That intensity helped make him a breakout player in 2023, but in the 2024 playoffs, it came at a steep price. In a postseason game, Louvu was penalized twice for illegal hits to the quarterback's head and neck area. The NFL reviewed the film afterward and hit him with two separate fines that totaled $33,766. For a player like Louvu, who thrives on physicality and aggression, it was a costly reminder of how thin the line has become between hard-nosed defense and dangerous play. What made the fine stand out wasn't just the amount. It was the fact that both came in the same game. For the NFL, it was an easy decision to double up. The league has been crystal clear that contact to the head, especially against quarterbacks, is non-negotiable. Even one hit can bring a big fine. Two in a playoff spotlight, that was always going to result in a hefty penalty. Patrick Mahomes, $14,000. Even the NFL's biggest stars aren't immune from league discipline. In 2024, Patrick Mahomes, two-time MVP, two-time Super Bowl champion, and the face of the NFL, was fined $14,000 for a gesture he made during a regular season game against the Buffalo Bills. After scoring a touchdown, Mahomes celebrated by making a gun-like hand gesture, pointing it toward the crowd. The NFL immediately flagged it as a violation of its conduct policy, which specifically prohibits gestures considered threatening, obscene, or suggestive of violence. For the league, the fine wasn't about targeting Mahomes personally. It was about consistency. The NFL has tried to tighten its image in recent years, particularly around celebrations and on-field behavior that could be seen as unsportsmanlike or inflammatory. Even though Mahomes is one of the league's most marketable players, the $14,000 penalty sent a clear message. No player, no matter how famous, gets a pass. Mahomes accepted the fine without much public pushback, but the incident sparked debate among fans. Some thought the punishment was excessive for what they saw as a harmless celebration. Others argued that the league has to draw the line somewhere, especially when its most visible players set the tone for everyone else. New Orleans Saints, Bountygate, $500,000. One of the NFL's most infamous scandals wasn't about deflated footballs or sideline cameras. It was about violence being incentivized. In 2012, the league revealed that the New Orleans Saints had operated a bounty system under defensive coordinator Greg Williams, where players were paid bonuses for injuring opponents or knocking them out of games. The system reportedly ran from 2009 through 2011, including the team's Super Bowl winning season. Investigators uncovered that defensive players were offered payouts for hits that caused injuries severe enough to sideline opposing stars. When the details became public, the backlash was immediate. Commissioner Roger Goodell handed down one of the harshest sets of punishments in NFL history. The Saints organization was fined $500,000, the maximum penalty allowed against a team at the time. In addition, they lost 2 second-round draft picks and saw several individuals suspended. Head coach Sean Payton was banned for the entire 2012 season. Defensive coordinator Greg Williams received an indefinite suspension, later reinstated. General manager Mickey Loomis was suspended for 8 games. Assistant coach Joe Vitt was suspended 6 games. The fallout crippled New Orleans' 2012 season and tarnished the franchise's reputation for years. The $500,000 fine was symbolic. It wasn't just about money. It was the league's way of making an example out of the Saints, showing that the NFL would not tolerate programs that rewarded injuries in a sport already under fire for safety concerns. Denico Autry, $2 million. In 2024, veteran defensive lineman Denico Autry found himself at the center of one of the most expensive fines ever handed to an individual player. Unlike most penalties, which come from late hits, personal fouls, or even uniform violations, Autry's fine stemmed from violating the league's performance-enhancing drug policy. The NFL suspended Autry for 6 games and tied that suspension to a financial hit of roughly $2 million. Because fines for PED violations are calculated by the amount of salary lost during the suspension, Autry's high cap hit meant that missing 6 games came with a massive financial penalty. It became one of the largest suspension-related fines in league history. For the NFL, this was about more than just punishing one player. PED enforcement has long been tied to the league's credibility and its attempts to maintain competitive balance. By coming down hard on a veteran like Autry, the league signaled that even experienced players on playoff-caliber teams would not get any leniency. Autry's fine shows how the structure of NFL contracts can magnify punishments. A younger player on a rookie deal might lose a fraction of that amount. But for a veteran starter, a 6-game suspension can strip away millions in earnings instantly. Derwin James, approximately $708,333. Los Angeles Chargers safety. Derwin James has built his career on playing fearless football. He's a hard hitter, a tone setter, and one of the league's most physical defenders. But in 2024, that style finally caught up to him in the form of one of the heaviest fines ever tied to player safety violations. During the season, James was flagged for repeated illegal hits, mostly helmet-to-helmet contact against receivers and quarterbacks. The NFL reviewed the plays and decided his history of prior violations warranted more than just a standard fine. James was suspended for 1 game, and the suspension carried an automatic financial penalty, the loss of a full game check. Because of James's high salary, that single missed paycheck cost him roughly $708,333. Unlike flat fines handed out for most personal fouls, suspensions are directly tied to a player's salary, which means star veterans can lose staggering sums of money even for a 1-game ban. For the league, this was about enforcing its player safety agenda. By 2024, the NFL had made clear that repeat offenders would not only be fined, but also suspended, and the money lost would serve as the ultimate deterrent. For James, it was a harsh reminder that even the most talented defensive players must adapt or pay the price. Literally. Terrell Owens. Terrell Owens was one of the most talented and polarizing wide receivers in NFL history. Over a 15-year career, he racked up over 15,000 receiving yards and 153 touchdowns, making him a lock for the Hall of Fame. But despite earning an estimated $80 million during his playing days, Owens faced serious financial troubles after retirement. Much of his downfall came from poor investments and excessive spending. Owens lived lavishly, multiple homes, luxury cars, and heavy child support obligations. At one point, he was paying support for 4 different children across multiple states, adding up to nearly $45,000 per month. When his NFL check stopped coming, the lifestyle didn't. He also trusted the wrong financial advisors, who reportedly lost millions of his money in risky and poorly managed investments. By 2012, just 2 years after leaving the league, Owens admitted he was broke and living off appearances and small contracts in semi-pro football. To his credit, Owens eventually stabilized his finances, took ownership of his mistakes, and rebuilt a brand through business ventures and public appearances. But his story is one of the most striking examples of how quickly fame and fortune can disappear, even for one of the greatest receivers of all time, Michael Vick. Michael Vick's story is one of the most dramatic rises and falls in NFL history. Coming out of Virginia Tech, he became the first overall pick in the 2001 draft and completely changed how people viewed the quarterback position. His athleticism was revolutionary. At his peak with the Atlanta Falcons, Vick was one of the highest paid players in football, earning over $130 million in contracts and endorsements. But in 2007, everything came crashing down. Vick was convicted for his role in a dogfighting operation and sentenced to 23 months in federal prison. The scandal destroyed his reputation, cost him tens of millions in salary, and wiped out endorsement deals with Nike, EA Sports, and others. When he was released from prison in 2009, Vick filed for bankruptcy. Court records showed he owed roughly $20 million to creditors, a mix of unpaid taxes, bad investments, and legal fees. He had spent lavishly on houses, cars, and a massive entourage during his early career, and without steady income, the money evaporated fast. Vick managed a remarkable comeback on the field with the Philadelphia Eagles, earning a Pro Bowl selection in 2010 and paying off the majority of his debts through his new contracts. He also rebuilt his public image by speaking out against animal cruelty and supporting community programs. In the end, Michael Vick became one of the rare athletes to climb out of financial ruin, but his story is a lasting example of how quickly fortune and fame can disappear, and how hard it is to recover once they do. Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson was one of the most dominant running backs the NFL has ever seen. Drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in 2007, he won MVP in 2012 after rushing for more than 2,000 yards, less than a year removed from a torn ACL. Over a 15-year career, he earned more than $100 million in salary, the most ever, for an NFL running back. But despite that fortune, Peterson's finances unraveled. By 2019, court documents revealed he owed several million dollars to creditors. His lawyers said that bad investments and trusting the wrong people had drained his wealth. Peterson had loaned and invested large sums through advisors who either mismanaged or misused his money, and the legal costs of recovering it only deepened the problem. He also lived an expensive lifestyle, multiple homes, luxury cars, and family obligations that were difficult to maintain once his NFL income slowed. By his mid-30s, he was still playing partly to repay debts, signing short contracts with Washington, Detroit, and Tennessee, long after most players at his position had retired. Peterson's story is a reminder of how even generational earnings can vanish quickly when combined with poor advice, high spending, and misplaced trust. On the field, he was a legend. Off it, another cautionary tale about how fleeting NFL wealth can be. Dan Marino. Dan Marino was one of the most prolific passers in NFL history. Over 17 seasons with the Miami Dolphins, he threw for more than 61,000 yards, made 9 Pro Bowls, and earned a spot in the Hall of Fame. During the 1980s and 90s, he was one of football's first megastars, signing lucrative contracts and endorsement deals that easily put his career earnings well above $50 million, a huge figure for that era. After retirement, Marino remained in the spotlight as a television analyst and public figure. But behind the scenes, some of his investments began to unravel. The most public example came in 2012, when the digital company Digital Domain Media Group, in which Marino had invested millions, filed for bankruptcy. Marino reportedly lost nearly $14 million when the company collapsed. He also dealt with several real estate and business ventures that failed to produce returns, a common theme for former athletes trying to transition into entrepreneurship without experienced financial oversight. Unlike some of his peers, Marino didn't declare personal bankruptcy or face major legal issues, but the losses significantly dented what had been a comfortable post-NFL fortune. Marino recovered by scaling back his ventures, focusing on broadcasting work and philanthropy through the Dan Marino Foundation, which supports children with autism. His story is less about reckless spending and more about the risks of trusting volatile investments, even for one of football's smartest quarterbacks, Warren Sapp. Warren Sapp was one of the most dominant defensive linemen of his era, a Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, and one of the defining players of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' great defenses in the early 2000s. Over his 13-year career, he earned more than $80 million in salary and endorsements. But after retirement, Sapp's finances spiraled out of control. By 2012, he filed for bankruptcy, listing more than $6.7 million in debt against just $6.4 million in assets. Among the debts were hundreds of thousands in child support and alimony payments, unpaid taxes, and loans tied to bad real estate ventures. Sapp was also caught in the housing market crash, owning multiple properties that lost enormous value. He listed items like hundreds of pairs of Air Jordans, expensive jewelry, and his Super Bowl ring among the possessions he had to liquidate. Unlike some players, Sapp didn't completely vanish from public life. He built a post-NFL media career with NFL Network, though that ended in 2015 after legal troubles off the field. Warren Sapp's story is a reminder that even Hall of Famers aren't immune to financial collapse. Despite earning generational wealth, poor planning, excessive spending, and unstable investments left one of the game's greatest defensive players starting over after football. Mark Ingram Sr. Mark Ingram Sr. was a Super Bowl winning wide receiver who played 10 seasons in the NFL, most notably with the New York Giants. He was a key piece of their 1990 championship team and earned a reputation as a tough, reliable target. During his career, he made millions in salary, solid money for the era. But after football, his life and finances took a sharp downturn. After retiring in the mid-1990s, Ingram became entangled in several legal and financial troubles. He lost large portions of his money through poor business ventures and unpaid debts. Things got worse when he was convicted of money laundering and bank fraud in the early 2000s. In 2008, he was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison after violating probation and failing to report for his sentence, going on the run until he was caught by U.S. Marshals. While incarcerated, his son,
Mark Ingram II,
was emerging as a star running back at Alabama. The contrast between their lives, a father in prison while his son was winning the Heisman Trophy, made headlines across the country. Since his release, Ingram Sr. has kept a much lower profile, occasionally seen supporting his son's career. His story serves as one of the most tragic examples of an NFL player's post-career collapse, not from overspending or mismanagement, but from crossing into criminal activity that cost him his freedom and his fortune. Bernie Kosar. Bernie Kosar was a hometown hero in Cleveland. The former University of Miami star became the Browns' franchise quarterback in the mid-1980s and led them to multiple AFC championship appearances. On the field, he was smart, accurate, and tough, the kind of player Cleveland fans adored. Over his 12-year career, he earned millions in salary and endorsements, and after retiring, he remained a beloved figure in the city. But Kosar's post-NFL life was defined by financial collapse. After football, he invested heavily in restaurants, real estate, and various business ventures around Ohio and Florida. Many of them failed. He also admitted to being far too generous, loaning and giving money to family members, friends, and former teammates who never paid him back. By 2009, he filed for bankruptcy, listing nearly $18 million in debt against about $9 million in assets. Kosar also battled personal struggles, including health issues related to repeated concussions and the painkillers prescribed to manage them. In interviews, he's been open about how those problems compounded his financial stress. In the years since, he's slowly rebuilt stability, focusing on broadcasting work and community outreach in Cleveland. He's spoken candidly about the lessons he learned and the importance of financial discipline for athletes. Bernie Kosar's story isn't one of reckless spending. It's about trust, generosity, and the harsh reality that even good intentions can lead to financial ruin when the checks stop coming. Travis Henry. Travis Henry was a powerful running back who entered the NFL in 2001 as a second-round pick for the Buffalo Bills. He had back-to-back 1,300-yard seasons early in his career and later played for the Titans and Broncos. Over 7 seasons, he earned more than $20 million, but his financial and legal troubles quickly overwhelmed him after retirement. Henry's biggest issue was child support debt. He reportedly fathered 11 children with 10 different women, and the monthly payments combined to tens of thousands of dollars. When his career ended, the income that had sustained that obligation disappeared almost overnight. The Bills didn't. His problems deepened when he turned to risky ways of finding money. In 2008, he was arrested on federal drug trafficking charges and later sentenced to 3 years in prison. Prosecutors said he financed a cocaine distribution ring, something Henry claimed he did only to try to stay afloat financially. By the time he was released, his fortune was gone and his reputation destroyed. His story shows how lifestyle choices and poor financial planning can sink even talented athletes earning millions. On the field, he had the power to carry defenders. Off the field, the weight of debt and bad decisions carried him down instead. Chris McAllister. Chris McAllister was one of the best cornerbacks of the 2000s, a shutdown defender who helped lead the Baltimore Ravens to a Super Bowl title in 2000. Over an 11-year career, he earned 3 Pro Bowl selections and made more than $40 million in salary and bonuses. On the field, he had everything: athleticism, swagger, and consistency. Off the field, though, his financial situation slowly collapsed. After injuries shortened his career, McAllister's income dried up, but his lifestyle didn't change. He owned multiple luxury cars and homes, and supported family and friends long after his NFL checks stopped. By 2009, just a year after leaving the league, reports surfaced that he was broke and living in his parents' house. Court filings from a child support case revealed he claimed to have no income and no funds, despite the fortune he'd earned over the previous decade. McAllister's downfall wasn't linked to criminal issues or massive scams. It was a case of overspending and poor financial management. Like many players, he didn't prepare for how short the average NFL career really is. In retirement, he's largely stayed out of the spotlight, living quietly away from the game he once dominated. His story is another reminder that even top-tier players, without the right financial discipline, can see millions disappear almost overnight.
Andre Rison,
known as Bad Moon, was one of the NFL's most talented and entertaining wide receivers of the 1990s. He played for 7 different teams, made 5 Pro Bowls, and earned over $20 million in career salary. On the field, he was a highlight reel, explosive, charismatic, and confident. Off it, his life often made as many headlines as his performances. Rison's financial downfall stemmed from a combination of high spending, unstable personal relationships, and poor money management. At the height of his fame, he lived extravagantly. Multiple houses, flashy jewelry, luxury cars, and a massive entourage. He was also famously involved in a turbulent relationship with singer Lisa Left Eye
Lopez,
TLC, which ended dramatically when she burned down his mansion during an argument in 1994. Over the years, Rison faced mounting debts and unpaid child support claims across several states. Despite later admitting to having made over $20 million in his playing career, he said most of it disappeared through impulsive decisions and misplaced trust in financial advisors. After football, Rison tried coaching and even appeared in ESPN's Broke documentary, speaking candidly about his mistakes and the lessons learned. He managed to rebuild his life to some degree, focusing on mentoring younger players and his son, Hunter Rison, who followed him into football.
Andre Rison's
story is one of pure talent overshadowed by poor choices, a reminder that fame and money can vanish as quickly as they appear when there's no plan to sustain them. Clinton Portis was one of the NFL's premier running backs in the 2000s. Drafted by Denver in 2002, he burst onto the scene with back-to-back 1,500-yard seasons before being traded to Washington, where he signed a contract worth more than $50 million, one of the largest ever for a running back at the time. Over 9 seasons, he earned roughly $43 million, enough to secure his future many times over. But Portis's post-NFL story became one of financial disaster. He trusted a team of financial advisors who allegedly mishandled and outright stole his money. By 2011, millions had vanished through risky real estate ventures, fraudulent investment schemes, and unpaid taxes. Portis eventually filed for bankruptcy in 2015, listing debts of nearly $5 million. The stress of losing his fortune reportedly pushed him to a breaking point. In an interview with Sports Illustrated, Portis admitted that he once contemplated confronting and possibly harming the advisors who cost him everything before a friend talked him down. Years later, things got worse. In 2021, Portis was convicted in a federal case involving healthcare fraud, where several ex-players were caught submitting false claims to the NFL's health program. He served time in prison before being released in 2023. Clinton Portis's story is tragic because it combines all the classic pitfalls: misplaced trust, bad investments, and desperation faced by athletes who earn millions quickly and lose it just as fast. For a few years, he was one of football's brightest stars. Off the field, his finances became one of its darkest cautionary tales. Mark Brunell was one of the NFL's most respected quarterbacks during the 1990s and early 2000s. Best known for his time with the Jacksonville Jaguars, he led the team to multiple playoff appearances and earned 3 Pro Bowl selections. Over a 19-year career that included stops in Green Bay, Washington, and New Orleans, Brunell earned more than $50 million in salary. But after his playing days ended, Brunell's business ventures dragged him into deep financial trouble. He invested heavily in real estate and several fast food franchises with former teammates, but the ventures collapsed after the 2008 housing market crash. He personally guaranteed many of the loans used to fund those projects, and when the businesses failed, the banks came after him. By 2010, Brunell filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing more than $25 million in debt against only $5 million in assets. He lost most of his investments, several properties, and a large portion of his savings. What made his case stand out was that Brunell wasn't reckless. By all accounts, he lived modestly and tried to build legitimate businesses. But poor timing and over-leveraging destroyed what he'd earned. Since then, Brunell has rebuilt his life. He transitioned into coaching, eventually becoming the quarterback's coach for the Detroit Lions, and he's been active in community and faith-based programs. His story is a reminder that sometimes financial collapse doesn't come from extravagance. It comes from the risks of entrepreneurship and the unforgiving nature of debt. Dermontti Dawson. Dermontti Dawson is widely considered one of the greatest centers to ever play in the NFL, spending his entire 13-year career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. From 1988 to 2000, he was a 7-time Pro Bowler, 6-time All-Pro, and eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame. He earned millions during his playing days and was universally respected for his intelligence, leadership, and work ethic. But like many players from his era, Dawson faced financial turmoil after retirement. He invested heavily in real estate and business ventures around Kentucky, including property development projects and fitness facilities. When the 2008 housing market collapsed, those investments backfired. Several of his properties went underwater, and the debts began to pile up faster than the income could cover them. By 2010, Dawson filed for bankruptcy, listing around $69 million in liabilities. Much of it came from personally guaranteed loans on failed real estate deals. Despite the staggering number, reports indicated that he didn't live an extravagant lifestyle. He simply got caught in the wrong market at the wrong time. Afterward, Dawson shifted toward rebuilding stability. He became involved in business consulting, charitable work, and speaking engagements, using his story to warn younger players about the risks of debt and overextension. His story isn't one of recklessness, but of how even careful, disciplined players can face ruin when the economy turns. Dermontti Dawson remains a Hall of Famer, not just for his play, but for his honesty about the lessons learned after football. Vince Young. Vince Young's story is one of the biggest what-ifs in NFL history. Coming out of Texas, he was a college legend, a national champion, and one of the most electrifying players the game had ever seen. Drafted 3rd overall in 2006, he became the NFL's Offensive Rookie of the Year and a 2-time Pro Bowler. Over his career, Young earned an estimated $35 to $40 million in salary and another $30 million in endorsements. But within a few years of leaving the league, nearly all of it was gone. Reports revealed that Young spent recklessly, buying luxury cars, throwing lavish parties, and once, allegedly, spending $5,000 at a single TGI Fridays. He also made several bad financial decisions, including loans he couldn't repay, and trusting advisors who mismanaged his funds. In 2014, Young filed for bankruptcy, listing less than $1 million in assets and nearly the same in debts. Court documents showed unpaid loans, mounting legal fees, and lingering tax issues. By his own admission, he had little understanding of where much of his money had gone. Since then, Young has tried to rebuild his life. He's worked in university programs at Texas, done broadcasting, and advocated for financial education among athletes. While his career on the field was short, his off-field struggles became a harsh lesson about how fast wealth can disappear without guidance or structure. Vince Young's name once symbolized limitless potential, both athletically and financially. But like too many before him, the fame and fortune faded faster than anyone imagined. Deuce McAllister. Deuce McAllister was the heart of the New Orleans Saints offense in the early 2000s. A fan favorite, known for his powerful running style and quiet leadership. Drafted in 2001, he spent his entire 8-year career with the Saints, earning 2 Pro Bowl selections and becoming the team's all-time leading rusher. He earned tens of millions during his playing days and was a beloved figure in Louisiana, both on and off the field. But after retirement, McAllister's finances took a major hit. He owned several car dealerships in Mississippi, most notably a Nissan franchise, which fell into debt after the 2008 economic crash. By 2009, the dealership filed for bankruptcy, and McAllister personally owed Nissan Motor Acceptance Corporation over $1.5 million in unpaid loans and inventory costs. McAllister had personally guaranteed much of the debt, which meant he was liable even after the business closed. The financial stress reportedly wiped out a large portion of his savings. Still, unlike many players who disappear after bankruptcy, McAllister stayed active in his community, continuing charity work and maintaining a close relationship with the Saints organization. He later found stability as a radio broadcaster for Saints games and through business consulting and public speaking. McAllister's story isn't one of reckless spending. It's about the risk of tying post-career ventures to unstable markets. Even one of the league's most respected players learned how quickly fortunes can turn when business investments collapse. Jamarcus Russell. Jamarcus Russell's career became the benchmark for wasted potential and financial collapse in the NFL. Drafted first overall by the Oakland Raiders in 2007, he was supposed to be the franchise quarterback to bring the team back to glory. His rookie contract was worth an astounding $61 million, with $32 million guaranteed, one of the richest rookie deals in league history at the time. But Russell's work ethic and conditioning became constant concerns. He struggled to learn the playbook, missed team workouts, and never found consistency on the field. In just 3 seasons, he started 25 games, winning only 7, and finished with more interceptions than touchdowns. By 2010, the Raiders released him, and his NFL career was over at just 24 years old. Despite earning over $36 million, Russell's fortune evaporated within a few years. Reports said he lived lavishly, expensive jewelry, cars, and houses, while failing to manage taxes or long-term finances. He later admitted that he fell into depression after being labeled the biggest bust in NFL history, and the financial fallout followed. In later interviews, Russell said he tried to make a comeback, even offering to play for free, but no team gave him a chance. His story has since become both a warning and a human story. A young player given unimaginable money and expectations before he was ready for either. Jamarcus Russell's financial downfall wasn't just about spending. It was about losing direction when the game, the fame, and the money disappeared all at once. Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor changed how defenses played. Drafted in 1981, Taylor dominated the NFL through sheer intensity, athleticism, and chaos. He won 2 Super Bowls, 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and became one of the few defensive players ever to win league MVP. By the time he retired in 1993, he had earned millions in salary and endorsements, with his name synonymous with defensive greatness. But Taylor's off-field life was turbulent, and it cost him dearly. Throughout his career, he battled drug addiction, run-ins with the law, and mounting debts. The combination of reckless spending, failed business ventures, and years of substance abuse drained his fortune. His legal troubles after retirement, including tax issues and multiple arrests, only made things worse. At one point, Taylor admitted that his finances were in disarray, saying he trusted the wrong people and lived far beyond his means. Lavish houses, cars, and constant partying burned through what he earned. Despite attempts to rebuild through coaching, appearances, and reality TV, much of his wealth never returned. Lawrence Taylor remains a football legend, but his financial and personal struggles became as famous as his highlight reels. His story stands as one of the clearest examples of how fame and fortune can be undone by addiction and chaos. Even for one of the greatest to ever play the game, Johnny Unitas. Johnny Unitas was one of the NFL's original superstars, the prototype for the modern quarterback. Known as Johnny U, he led the Baltimore Colts to 3 NFL championships, a Super Bowl, and 3 MVP awards during his 18-year career. His precision passing, leadership, and toughness defined professional football in the late 1950s and 1960s. But even for a legend like Unitas, financial trouble found its way after retirement. Unlike today's players,
Unitas.
didn't earn massive contracts during his playing years. His highest annual salary was around $125,000. When he left the game, he looked to business to build wealth, but most of those ventures failed. He invested heavily in restaurants, bowling alleys, and real estate projects that either collapsed or never turned a profit. By the late 1980s, Unitas had filed for bankruptcy, citing nearly $4 million in losses from failed deals and unpaid loans. The collapse was worsened by trusting poor financial partners and overextending into ventures that needed constant cash flow to survive. His name carried weight, but it wasn't enough to save the businesses bearing it. Despite his financial struggles, Unitas remained an icon in Baltimore, running youth programs, doing speaking engagements, and mentoring young players. He passed away in 2002, still deeply respected as a pioneer of the sport, but with a reminder that fame and legacy don't guarantee financial security. Johnny Unitas built the foundation of modern quarterback play. Unfortunately, like many who came before the era of big contracts, his fortune didn't last nearly as long as his influence. Raghib Ismail. Raghib Rocket Ismail was one of the fastest and most exciting players college football had ever seen. At Notre Dame, he was a superstar, a two-time All-American who finished second in the 1990 Heisman Trophy race. Instead of entering the NFL right away, he shocked the sports world by signing with the CFL's Toronto Argonauts on an unprecedented $18.2 million contract, making him the highest-paid football player in the world at the time. When he eventually joined the NFL in 1993, Ismail had a solid career, playing 9 seasons for the Raiders, Panthers, and Cowboys. He earned millions more in contracts and endorsements. But despite all of that money, he ended up losing almost everything. After retirement, Ismail invested heavily in a series of failed ventures: car customization shops, music production companies, clothing lines, and even a plan to open a theme restaurant. Most of these were launched through friends or associates who lacked business experience. One by one, they collapsed, leaving Ismail deep in debt. In interviews, he said that his downfall wasn't from wild spending, but from misplaced trust. He tried to help people around him succeed and spread his wealth too thin. As the failed ventures piled up, his savings evaporated. Still, Ismail didn't disappear. He transitioned into broadcasting, motivational speaking, and mentorship programs for young athletes. His story remains a warning for players who come into sudden wealth. Not every loss comes from greed or excess. Sometimes it comes from trying to do too much, too fast, with too many people. Raghib Ismail was once nicknamed the Rocket for how quickly he could take off down a field, but his fortune, like his career, proved to move just as fast in the opposite direction. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.